Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. What secrets lie in the darkness beneath our feet? I've asked myself this question countless times since that day. My name is Thomas Landry, and I'm still not sure if sharing this account will bring me any peace, but the weight of keeping it inside has become unbearable. Perhaps by putting these words down, I can finally convince myself that what happened in those ancient catacombs was real. It began 3 weeks ago when the City Council approved my archaeological survey of Old Town's forgotten underground network. As the lead historian at Westlake University, I'd spent years piecing together fragments of our city's hidden past, the network of tunnels and chambers that predated modern Westlake by centuries. The recent floods had damaged part of the market square, revealing a crumbling stone archway that matched descriptions and documents I'd studied. A pathway into history that had been sealed for over 200 years. The day of the expedition, the air hung heavy with an unseasonable chill. Unusual for June, but I barely noticed, too focused on the task ahead. My assistant, Marcus, had called in sick that morning, food poisoning, he claimed, leaving me to venture down alone with just my equipment. In retrospect, his absence was the first warning I should have heeded. Be careful down there, Professor, the site foreman said as I checked my headlamp. These old structures can be treacherous after the flooding. I nodded, barely listening, my mind already descending into the darkness below. The entrance had been secured with temporary supports, creating a narrow passage between modern concrete and ancient stone. As I ducked beneath the wooden beams, the sounds of the city began to fade, replaced by the gentle drip of water and the soft echo of my footsteps. The first chamber was exactly as the historical accounts described, a circular room with 7 archways, only one still accessible. The walls bore faded symbols, some I recognized from my research, others unfamiliar. I photographed everything methodically, the flash of my camera momentarily illuminating corners that hadn't seen light in centuries. That's when I first noticed it, a subtle shift in the air. Not just the expected drop in temperature or the increased humidity, but something almost tactile. The feeling of being watched. I turned quickly, sweeping my light across the chamber, but found only shadows and stone. Just nerves, I muttered to myself, the sound of my voice oddly muffled, as if the very air absorbed it. The passage beyond the accessible archway descended further, the stone steps worn smooth by countless feet from a forgotten era. Water pooled in the lower sections, reflecting my light in distorted patterns across the ceiling. I proceeded carefully, one hand against the damp wall for stability. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and my breath caught in my throat. Unlike the utilitarian design of the entrance, this room showed careful craftsmanship, columns carved with intricate patterns, a tiled floor partially submerged under inches of stagnant water, and walls adorned with faded murals. I waded in carefully, the cold water seeping through my boots as I approached the center where something caught my eye, a stone altar, its surface just above the waterline. Upon it rested a small object that gleamed dully in my light, a bronze key, ornate and untarnished despite its surroundings. As I reached for it, the water around my ankles rippled. Not from my movement, but from something else, something beneath the surface. I froze, flashlight beam trembling slightly as I scanned the dark water. Nothing moved. Just my imagination, surely. I picked up the key, surprising myself with how warm it felt against my skin. As I examined it, Something shifted in my peripheral vision, a shadow moving independently of my light, sliding across the far wall before disappearing through a crack in the masonry. Hello? My voice sounded wrong, too high, too uncertain. The chamber returned only the soft splash of water. I slipped the key into my pocket, suddenly eager to document what I needed and return to the surface. As I photographed the murals, I noticed details I missed at first glance: figures and postures of agony, scenes of ritual sacrifice, faces contorted in silent screams. Not the historical record I'd expected, but something darker. The click of my camera echoed unnaturally loud. Between each click, I became increasingly aware of another sound, a whisper so faint I couldn't be sure it wasn't just water trickling down stone. But it seemed to form words, incomprehensible yet somehow familiar. My hands grew unsteady as I worked, rushing now. When I turned to photograph the final wall, my light caught something that made my heart stutter, a handprint on the stone column beside me. A fresh handprint, glistening wet, too small to be mine. I backed away, nearly slipping in the water. The splashing sounds were amplified in the chamber, but something about their rhythm felt wrong, as if something else was moving through the water with me, matching my retreat step for step. The whispers grew more distinct. Names, perhaps. Please. Warnings. My back hit the wall, and I spun to face the corridor I'd entered through. The water there seemed darker, unnaturally still compared to the ripples around my feet. As I watched, frozen in place, the surface broke, just a slight disturbance, as if something had risen just beneath the waterline. I didn't wait to see more. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I sloshed toward the exit, no longer concerned with disturbing the archaeological site. The beam of my light bounced wildly across the chamber, creating a disorienting dance of shadows that seemed to reach for me from every direction. As I entered the narrow corridor, my light flickered once, twice, then failed completely. In that instant of perfect darkness, I felt something brush against my leg beneath the water. Something cold. Something deliberate. And from behind me, no longer a whisper but a clear, hollow voice: "You shouldn't have taken what isn't yours." My scream echoed through the ancient stones as I scrambled forward in blind panic, hands scraping against rough walls, feet splashing desperately through the rising water that seemed to pull at me, trying to slow my escape. When I finally burst into the first chamber, gasping and trembling, my light mysteriously flickered back to life. I stood alone, drenched and shaking, listening to the sound of water dripping steadily in the darkness behind me, and something else that might have been laughter, distant and cold. The key burned in my pocket like a brand, and I knew with terrible certainty that whatever dwelled in those flooded chambers was coming with me, all the way back to the surface. And as I climbed toward daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't climbing alone. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom touch of cold fingers against my ankle, heard the whispers that seemed to follow me from those flooded chambers. My apartment felt different somehow. Smaller. Less secure. I sat at my desk until dawn, the bronze key placed before me on a towel, its intricate patterns catching the lamplight. I'd examined it for hours, photographed it, measured it, yet found nothing to explain the dread it inspired. By all appearances, it was simply an antique key, perhaps 200 years old, crafted with remarkable skill, but otherwise unremarkable. Except for how warm it remained to the touch, despite the chill that had settled over my entire apartment. When morning finally came, I called the university to request a few days of personal leave. Dean Richardson sounded concerned. It wasn't like me to abandon a project so suddenly, especially one I'd championed for years. I fabricated an illness, promised to return soon, and hung up before she could ask more questions. What could I have told her? That I feared something had followed me from beneath the city? That I heard whispers in my walls? I spent the day researching the history of the catacombs, hoping to find some mention of the key or the altar where I'd found it. By evening, my eyes burned from staring at scanned manuscripts and digital archives, but I found nothing new, just the same fragments I already knew about: the underground networks used as storage cellars, emergency shelters during long-forgotten conflicts, and eventually makeshift tombs during a plague that had ravaged the region in the 18th century. Nothing about rituals. Nothing about an altar. Nothing to explain what I'd encountered. As twilight settled outside my window, the pipes in my bathroom began to groan, a low, mournful sound that might have been normal in a building as old as mine, except it didn't stop. It rose and fell in patterns too regular, too deliberate to be random pressure changes. Almost like words. I tried to ignore it, turning on music to drown out the sound. But between songs, in those brief moments of silence, I could swear I heard my name whispered from the darkness of my hallway. Thomas. The first night became the second, and still, I couldn't bring myself to sleep more than fitful minutes at a time. When I did drift off, I dreamed of dark water rising around me, of pale faces watching from beneath the surface, their eyes following my movements with hungry intent. On the third day, I received a text message from an unknown number. You need to return what you've taken, before it's too late. My hand shook as I tried to call the number back. The line was disconnected. I placed the key in a small wooden box and buried it at the back of my closet, under winter clothes I wouldn't need for months. Perhaps childishly, I hoped that putting it out of sight might quiet the growing disturbances in my apartment. The cold spots that seemed to follow me from room to room. The shadows that moved against the natural flow of light. The constant, persistent feeling of being watched. That night, exhaustion finally overcame my fear. I fell into a deep sleep, only to wake at exactly 3:13 in the morning to the sound of water dripping onto my hardwood floor. Drip. 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 I opened my eyes to perfect darkness. The digital clock beside my bed was dead, though I distinctly remembered seeing its red numbers as I drifted off. The entire apartment was silent except for that steady dripping. I reached for my phone to use as a light, but my fingers found only a puddle of water where my phone should have been. The dripping continued, closer now. Not from the ceiling or a leaky faucet, but from something at the foot of my bed. I lay frozen, barely breathing, as my eyes strained to adjust to the darkness. Gradually, a silhouette took shape, a figure standing motionless, watching me. Water pooled around its feet, expanding slowly across my floor. Who's there? My voice cracked with terror. The figure didn't move, but the dripping stopped. For 3 agonizing heartbeats, there was absolute silence. Then, a voice, raspy and wet, as if speaking through fluid-filled lungs. Return it to the waters, or the waters will come to you. I lunged for the lamp beside my bed, fingers fumbling with the switch. When light finally flooded the room, I was alone, but the puddle of water remained, stretching from the foot of my bed to my closet door, which stood slightly ajar. With trembling hands, I crossed the room and pulled the closet door fully open. Water had soaked through the pile of winter clothes, creating a dark stain that led directly to where I'd hidden the box containing the key. The box itself was untouched, but as I lifted it, water streamed from its seams. Inside, the key rested in a pool of stagnant water that smelled of mold and decay, the unmistakable scent of the flooded catacombs. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the remainder of the night in my living room, lights blazing, the television's background noise a poor shield against the sounds that occasionally emanated from my bedroom, the creaking of floorboards beneath invisible feet, the soft splash of water where no water should be. When morning came, I made my decision. I would return the key, face whatever waited in those dark chambers, and end this haunting before it consumed me entirely. I arrived at the excavation site just after 9. The workers seemed surprised to see me, especially in my disheveled state. 3 days without proper sleep had left me pale and unsteady. Professor Landry, the site foreman, greeted me with obvious concern. "Are you feeling all right? We weren't expecting you back so soon." "I need to check something," I said, already moving toward the entrance to the catacombs. "It won't take long." "I'm afraid that's not possible today," he replied, stepping into my path. There was another heavy rainfall last night. The lower chambers are completely flooded now. We've had to pump water out just to maintain access to the first room. My blood ran cold. Flooded? How deep? Ceiling high in some sections. The structural engineers want to assess the damage before we allow anyone down again. It might be weeks. I clutched the key in my pocket, feeling its unnatural warmth intensify, as if responding to its proximity to the catacombs. "I need to get down there," I insisted. "Just to the first chamber." "I left something important." The foreman hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Just the first chamber, and not alone." "I'll come with you." We descended together, the temporary lighting casting long shadows across the stone walls. Even the entrance tunnel felt different, the air heavier, the darkness beyond our lights more absolute. The circular chamber with its 7 archways appeared much as I remembered, except now the floor glistened with a thin layer of water that reflected our lights in distorted patterns. "The water's still rising," the foreman noted, pointing to the visible waterline on the walls. "Another few hours and even this room might be inaccessible." I barely heard him. My attention was fixed on the accessible archway that led to the lower chambers, where dark water now filled the passage completely, still and black as oil. As I stared into that impenetrable darkness, something moved beneath the surface, a pale shape, too quick to identify, disappearing into the depths. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "See what?" The foreman was examining one of the support beams, his back to the flooded passage. Before I could answer, the water in the archway rippled again, and a hand broke the surface. Pale, slender fingers spread wide, reaching upward as if imploring. Then another hand. And another. Dozens of them, suddenly breaching the black water, grasping at empty air. The foreman still noticed nothing, but I stumbled backward in horror, the key burning against my thigh through the fabric of my pocket. As if sensing my retreat, the hands changed direction, all turning toward me with deliberate, synchronized movement. Then, slowly, they began to sink back beneath the surface, one by one. The last hand to disappear pointed directly at me. No, not at me. At my pocket where the key rested. "We need to leave," I gasped, already backing toward the exit. "Right now." The foreman turned, startled by the panic in my voice. "What's wrong? Is it the support beams?" "The water," I managed, unable to tear my eyes from the now still surface of the flooded passage. "Something's in the water." He looked at me with growing concern, clearly seeing nothing unusual. "Professor, perhaps you should take more time off. The stress of the project." His words cut off abruptly as the lights flickered once, twice, and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of water moving. Not the gentle lapping of disturbed liquid, but the deliberate splash of something emerging, something approaching. The foreman's flashlight sputtered to life, casting wild shadows as he turned in confusion. Damn power surge. Let's head back up, check the generator. His light passed across the flooded archway, and I saw them, faces just beneath the surface of the water that now seemed to be rising, spilling from the passageway into the main chamber. Dozens of faces, their features distorted by the water, eyes open and fixed on me. The foreman saw nothing, but he must have sensed my terror because he grabbed my arm. Come on, Professor. Let's go. We splashed toward the exit, the water now ankle deep and rising rapidly. With each step, I felt resistance, as if invisible hands clutched at my feet, trying to hold me back. Just as we reached the stairs leading up, I heard it again, that same hollow voice from my first descent. You cannot escape the waters. The foreman didn't react. He couldn't hear it. This haunting was meant for me alone. As we emerged into daylight, I glanced back one last time. Water seeped from the entrance, dark and unnatural, forming patterns on the concrete that resembled handprints before evaporating in the morning sun. I knew then that returning the key would not be as simple as going back down. Whatever presence dwelled in those flooded chambers was spreading, reaching beyond its confines. And somehow, I had become its conduit to the world above. That night, the rain began again. Not the gentle spring showers that had been common all season, but a torrential downpour that drummed against my windows with almost deliberate force. I sat at my kitchen table, the bronze key before me, a half-empty bottle of whiskey my only company. The television murmured in the background, a local news report about unusual flooding across the city. Areas that had never experienced water damage were suddenly inundated. Storm drains overflowed, basements filled, and most curiously, several water mains had burst simultaneously, all within a half-mile radius of the archaeological site. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my assistant who had conveniently avoided the initial descent into the catacombs. Have you seen the news? The entire market square is underwater. They're saying it's reached the catacombs entrance. Everything okay? I didn't respond. Couldn't find the words to explain what was happening, that this was no ordinary rainfall, that the water had a purpose, a consciousness driving it toward me. The key seemed to pulse in the dim light, its bronze surface now marked with a patina that hadn't been there before, patterns like flowing water etched into the metal. I needed answers. The university archives had provided nothing useful, but there was one other option. William Kerrigan, a local historian whose family had been in Westlake for generations. If anyone knew the secrets of what lay beneath the city, it would be him. Despite the late hour and the pounding rain, I grabbed my coat and the key, secured in a plastic bag, though I doubted any container could truly isolate its influence. The streets were eerily deserted as I drove through sheets of rain so thick my wipers could barely keep pace. Water rushed along the gutters in torrents, converging in directions that defied the city's drainage design, all flowing toward the market square, toward the entrance to the catacombs. Kerrigan lived on the outskirts of town in a Victorian house that had belonged to his family for over a century. When I arrived, drenched despite the brief dash from my car to his porch, I was surprised to find lights burning in his study window despite the late hour. He answered the door on my second knock, his weathered face grave but unsurprised. Professor Landry, he said quietly. I've been expecting you. The statement chilled me more than the rain. You have? Word travels quickly when the old passages are disturbed. He ushered me inside, his gaze dropping briefly to my coat pocket where the outline of the plastic bag was visible. And when things are removed from where they belong. His study was a historian's dream, walls lined with books, glass cases displaying artifacts, maps of the city from various eras spread across a massive oak table. But it was a particular map that drew my attention, an architectural drawing of the catacombs, far more detailed than anything in the university archives. "You know about the chambers," I said, not a question but a realization. Kerrigan nodded slowly. "My great-grandfather was among those who sealed the lower levels in 1878. After the last incident. Incident? My mouth went dry. Instead of answering directly, he pointed to the map. "The network is far more extensive than your university believes. The chambers you've accessed are merely the upper level of a much older structure that predates the city itself." His finger traced along the yellow paper, indicating passages and rooms that extended well beyond the area we'd surveyed. At the center was a large circular chamber marked with symbols I didn't recognize. "What is that place?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They called it the Chamber of Voices." Kerrigan's voice dropped barely above a whisper. "A place where the barrier between worlds is thinnest, where the dead can speak to the living through the medium of water." I withdrew the key from my pocket, still in its plastic bag, now filled with water that had appeared from nowhere. "And this? What does this open?" Kerrigan's face paled as he stared at the key. He made no move to touch it, even through the plastic. "The lockmaster's key. It doesn't open anything, Professor Landry. It binds." "Binds what?" "Those who died in the flood of 1731. Over 300 souls, trapped when the river changed course and filled the lower chambers in a single night. Workers, prisoners, those who sought refuge underground, all drowned before they could escape." A chill ran through me as I remembered the hands reaching from the water, the faces just beneath the surface. "The key was forged to contain their spirits," Kerrigan continued, "to prevent them from influencing our world through the water that claimed them. It was placed upon the binding altar by my ancestor, sealed with rituals now forgotten. And I removed it," I whispered, the full weight of my action finally clear. "Yes." His gaze was heavy with knowledge and fear. "And now they seek to reclaim their freedom, to spread beyond their watery prison through the floods, to walk among the living once more." As if responding to his words, the rain intensified, hammering against the windows with renewed fury. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the wail of emergency sirens. How do I stop it? How do I put this back? Kerrigan moved to a bookshelf, retrieving an ancient leather-bound volume. "The ritual requires the key to be returned to the altar by the one who removed it, accompanied by these words of binding." He opened the book to a marked page filled with text in a language I didn't recognize. "But there's a problem." "Just one?" I laughed, the sound brittle with hysteria. "The Chamber of Voices lies at the lowest level of the catacombs. With the flooding, it's likely submerged entirely." "You mean I have to dive into their domain?" "Yes." His expression was grim. "And they will resist. The spirits have tasted freedom again after centuries of confinement. They won't return willingly." I stared at the key through its plastic prison, watching as the water inside the bag seemed to move independently, swirling around the bronze even as I held it still. "I don't have a choice," I finally said. "The flooding will only get worse, won't it?" Kerrigan nodded solemnly. "They're using the water to extend their reach. First the catacombs, then the surrounding area. Eventually, the entire city could be affected." "Affected how?" He hesitated, then turned to a glass case containing what appeared to be a collection of antique photographs. He unlocked it and withdrew a sepia-toned image, handling it with reverent care. This was taken during the last breach in 1878, before my great-grandfather resealed the chambers. The photograph showed a street corner I recognized as part of the old market district. But what caught my eye were the figures captured in the image, ordinary townspeople going about their business, except for one detail that sent ice through my veins. Several of the figures were partially transparent, their features blurred as if captured in motion. But their eyes were unnaturally clear, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that transcended the faded paper. The drowned ones, Kerrigan explained quietly. Walking among the living, using water as their conduit. Taking possession of those who had contact with the waters from below. Gradually replacing them. The implication struck me with physical force. The rising water levels in the city are just the beginning. The vessels they seek aren't made of stone and earth, Professor Landry. They're made of flesh and blood. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert, flash flood warnings throughout the city, mandatory evacuations for low-lying areas, all citizens advised to seek higher ground. I need to go back, I said, standing abruptly. Tonight, before the waters rise further. You'll need help, Kerrigan replied, already moving to gather supplies. Equipment for the dive, protection against what waits below. Protection? What could possibly protect against? I gestured helplessly at the photograph, at the spectral figures captured in ancient silver nitrate. From a cabinet, he withdrew a small cloth bag that clinked with the sound of metal contents. Salt from tears, iron forged in sacred fire, tokens blessed by those who understood the old ways better than we do. Small barriers against their influence. He pressed the bag into my hand, then turned to copy the binding ritual from the book onto a waterproof card. Memorize these words. The card may not survive the waters. As I studied the phonetic transcription he prepared, the lights in his study flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by the blue-white flashes of lightning outside. In that stuttering illumination, I saw something that stopped my breath, water seeping beneath Kerrigan's study door, spreading across the hardwood floor with unnatural purpose, forming patterns too deliberate to be random flow. They've found us, Kerrigan whispered, backing away from the advancing puddle. They know what we intend. The water moved faster now, splitting into rivulets that surrounded us, cutting off our path to the door. As the next lightning flash illuminated the room, I saw faces in the thin layer of water, distorted, twisted with rage, mouths open in silent screams that somehow filled the air with pressure that made my ears pop. The key, Kerrigan hissed. It's drawing them to you. You must go, now. I clutched the plastic bag containing the key, the protective cloth bag, and the ritual instructions, backing toward the window as the water converged, rising impossibly against gravity to form a wavering column in the center of the room. The column took shape, vaguely humanoid but composed entirely of churning water that caught the lightning flashes, refracting them into prismatic patterns across the walls. From within that liquid form came a voice I recognized from the catacombs, from my apartment, from my nightmares. The key belongs to the waters. As do you, Thomas Landry. A watery arm extended toward me, fingers elongating impossibly. Kerrigan moved with surprising speed for his age, placing himself between me and the water entity. Go, he shouted. I'll hold them here. Return the key before dawn or all is lost. I didn't wait to witness his stand against the water specter. I crashed through the side door of the study onto a covered porch, then sprinted through the downpour to my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back at the house. Water poured from every window, not flowing downward but hovering in midair, forming dozens of faces that all turned in unison to watch my escape. The drive back to the city center was a nightmare of flooded roads and fallen trees. Twice I had to detour when streets became impassable rivers. The emergency broadcast reported unprecedented water levels throughout Westlake, with the market square now completely submerged under 6 feet of churning water. But I knew where I needed to go, and what waited for me beneath those dark waters. As I approached the city center, I could see emergency vehicles, their lights creating eerie patterns in the rain-soaked darkness. Police barricades blocked access to the market square, but I found a side street that brought me within a block of the archaeological site. I parked and gathered my courage along with Kerrigan's protective items. The key, still in its water-filled bag, seemed to pulse with anticipation as I approached the flooded square. What had once been an orderly excavation site was now a churning pool that had consumed the entire plaza. The temporary structures around the catacomb entrance had been swept away, leaving nothing to mark where the descent began except my own memory. And something else, a stillness at the center of the floodwaters, a perfect circle of calm amid the chaos, directly above where I knew the entrance to be. As I stood at the edge of the flood, emergency workers shouted for me to retreat to higher ground. I ignored them, focused entirely on what I had to do. I removed my jacket and shoes, secured the key and ritual instructions in a waterproof pouch around my neck, and stepped into the floodwaters. The cold was immediate and shocking, but something else struck me harder, the sudden silence. The moment the water reached my knees, all sound from the emergency vehicles, the shouting workers, even the pounding rain seemed to vanish, replaced by a hollow, underwater quality as if I had submerged completely. And beneath that silence, whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping in a cacophony of pleading, threatening, promising voices that seemed to emanate from the water itself. We've waited so long. Freedom at last. Join us, Thomas. The waters welcome you. With each step deeper into the flood, the voices grew clearer, more distinct. The water around me began to move in patterns contrary to the natural flow, swirling around my legs like curious animals investigating an intruder, or shepherding me toward my destination. By the time I reached the center of the square, the water had risen to my chest. The circle of unnatural calm expanded around me, creating a boundary between the churning flood beyond and the almost glass-like surface where I stood. I took a deep breath, clutched the pouch containing the key, and dug beneath the surface. The waters closed over my head, and the world transformed. I was prepared for darkness, for cold, for the disorientation of submersion. I wasn't prepared for light. As I dove beneath the surface, the floodwaters illuminated with an ethereal blue-green phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the water itself. Through this spectral glow, I could clearly see the entrance to the catacombs below, the stone archway now a portal into an underwater realm. The descent was surreal. I swam downward, expecting my lungs to burn with the need for air, but the pressure in my chest never came. I could breathe the water as if it were air, each inhalation filling me with icy liquid that somehow sustained rather than drowned. This wasn't natural. This was their doing, the spirits of the flood keeping me alive for their own purposes. The circular first chamber appeared below me, transformed by the flood into an underwater grotto. The phosphorescence was stronger here, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat, casting moving shadows across the ancient stone walls. I swam through the archway that led to the lower chambers, the corridor now an underwater tunnel stretching downward into depths that seemed impossible given the architectural plans I'd studied. The catacombs were expanding, revealing passages that couldn't exist in the physical world I knew. As I descended, I began to see them, translucent figures drifting through the flooded passages. Men and women in clothing from different eras, their forms blurring at the edges as if constantly dissolving and reforming. They watched my progress with hollow eyes that gleamed with the same phosphorescence as the water around us. None approached me directly, but they followed in my wake, a growing procession of the drowned trailing behind as I swam deeper into their domain. The key pulsed against my chest, growing warmer with each meter of descent, guiding me like a compass toward its rightful place. The whispers returned, not through my ears but directly into my mind. The living have forgotten us. We suffered in darkness for centuries. You will be our voice in the world above. Release us. I tried to shut them out, focusing on the physical act of swimming, on the directions Kerrigan had given me. The chamber of voices would be at the lowest level, beyond the storage rooms and the old prison cells. The passage opened into a vast underwater chamber that must have once been the prison. Rusted iron bars formed cells along the walls, many bent or broken by some ancient catastrophe, the flood that had claimed these souls, perhaps. Within some cells, ghostly figures sat or stood motionless, staring outward with expressions of eternal patience. One turned to watch me pass, pressing a translucent hand against the bars. As our eyes met, a vision slammed into my consciousness. Rushing water tearing through stone passages, screams echoing off walls, desperate hands clawing at sealed exits, lungs burning, darkness closing in. I gasped, inhaling more of the impossible water, the memory of drowning so vivid I clutched at my own throat. The spirit continued to watch me, its expression neither malevolent nor benign, simply observing, sharing its death as a statement of fact. Beyond the prison chamber, the architecture changed. The squared corners and utilitarian design gave way to curved archways and walls carved with symbols similar to those in Kerrigan's book. The phosphorescence grew stronger, pulsing more rapidly, highlighting the symbols and sequential patterns that suggesting a language and light, a communication I couldn't comprehend but could feel reverberating through the water around me. The corridor widened into an antechamber adorned with stone statues, their features eroded by centuries underwater yet still recognizable as robed figures with outstretched hands. Water flowed through these stone hands in defiance of physics, creating streams that converged at the center of the room before flowing downward through an ornate spiral staircase. The procession of spirits had grown, now numbering in the dozens, a silent entourage escorting me deeper into their realm. None interfered with my progress, but their presence pressed against me like a physical weight, their collective consciousness a constant murmur at the edges of my mind. At the bottom of the spiral staircase, I found it, the Chamber of Voices. The space was vast, circular, its ceiling lost in darkness above the glowing waters. A perfect circle of columns surrounded a central platform that rose just above the waterline, upon which stood an altar of black stone veined with what looked like silver but pulsed with the same phosphorescence as the water. And on that altar, nothing. An empty depression carved into the stone, precisely the size and shape of the key I carried. As I swam toward the platform, the spirits held back, forming a ring around the perimeter of the chamber. Their forms seemed more solid here, less like patterns in water and more like actual bodies, watching with expectant stillness. I pulled myself onto the platform, water streaming from my clothes as I stood before the altar. The protection bag Kerrigan had given me felt leaden in my pocket, while the pouch containing the key burned against my skin. The silence was absolute as I withdrew the key from its waterproof container. Even the whispers had ceased, as if the entire chamber held its breath. The key had transformed during our journey. The bronze now gleamed like new, the water pattern engravings glowing with the same light as the flood around us. It felt alive in my palm, vibrating with subtle energy. I placed my other hand on the ritual instructions, prepared to recite the binding words as I returned the key to its place. But as I opened my mouth, A voice spoke behind me, clear, physical, not the whispered thoughts that had followed me through the depths. Is that really what you want to do, Thomas? I turned to find a woman standing on the platform. Not a spirit, she appeared solid, real, water dripping from her modern clothing. Her face was kind, familiar somehow, though I couldn't place her. Who are you? I managed, my voice strange to my ears after the underwater silence. A messenger, she smiled, taking a step toward me. From those who had been imprisoned too long. Something about her movement struck me as wrong, too fluid, as if her joints worked differently than human anatomy should allow. The spirits of the flood, I said, clutching the key tighter. You're not real. I'm as real as you need me to be. She gestured around us. They've shown you extraordinary things tonight, Thomas. Allowed you to breathe underwater, to witness their world. All they ask is understanding, compassion. They're causing destruction above, I countered. The floods are necessary, she interjected smoothly. A temporary measure to reach those who might listen. Like you. Special ones who can hear their voices. She took another step closer, and I noticed water continuously streaming from her hair, her clothes, though she never seemed to dry. They were forgotten, Thomas. Left to suffer in darkness for centuries. All they want is acknowledgement. To be remembered. To have their story told. Despite myself, I felt sympathy stirring. What happened to them? Her expression shifted to one of profound sorrow. They were sacrificed. The flood of 1731 wasn't an accident. The river was deliberately diverted to seal away a truth too dangerous for the town above. What truth? That the founders of Westlake built their fortune on blood. That the catacombs held evidence of their crimes, the exploitation, the torture, the rituals performed for power and wealth. Her eyes gleamed with the same phosphorescence as the water. History buried them twice, first in these chambers, then in forgetful silence. She held out her hand. Water collected in her palm, forming a small pool that reflected my face, but altered, my features blending with others, dozens of overlapping identities merging with mine. You could be their voice, Thomas. Their witness to the world. All you need to do is cast the key into the waters instead of returning it to the altar. Break the binding that has silenced them for generations. The offer was tempting. As a historian, the idea of uncovering a buried truth, of giving voice to forgotten victims, resonated deeply. And there was something else, a longing I could feel emanating from the spirits around us, a desperate need to be acknowledged that matched my own lifelong search for meaning in the past. I looked down at the key in my hand, then at the waiting altar. If I free them, I asked slowly, what happens to the city above? To the people living there now? Her smile faltered slightly. Change requires sacrifice, Thomas. Some disruption is inevitable when righting historical wrongs. That's not an answer. Her expression hardened, the kindness draining away. They will take what they need to be heard. Water seeks its level. Those who drown will find new vessels through which to speak. The living have had their time. The implication chilled me more than the floodwaters ever could. Possession. You're talking about mass possession. Reclamation, she corrected, her form beginning to lose cohesion, water streaming more rapidly from her outline. A balance restored. Behind her, the ring of spirits had drawn closer, their translucent forms pressing inward like a collapsing noose. Their expressions had changed from passive observation to hungry anticipation. I clutched Kerrigan's protective bag, feeling the items inside: salt, iron, tokens of warding. With my other hand, I held the key above the altar, remembering the ritual words he transcribed. "I can't let that happen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The woman's face contorted with rage, her features melting into a mask of water that barely held human shape. "Then you will join us in the depths." She lunged forward, her arms elongating into torrents of water aimed at my throat. I stumbled backward, nearly falling from the platform into the waiting spirits, but managed to tear open Kerrigan's bag with my teeth. Iron filings scattered across the water's surface, creating an instant barrier that hissed and steamed where it touched the spectral forms. The spirits recoiled, their whispers rising to screams that vibrated through the water around us. The woman, or what had appeared to be a woman, dissolved completely, her humanoid shape giving way to a writhing column of water filled with faces that shifted and transformed. Generations of the drowned merged into one hydrous entity. "Thief!" The voice thundered from everywhere at once. "The key is ours." The platform beneath my feet began to shake as the waters churned violently. From the depths of the chamber, objects began to rise: waterlogged bones, rusted chains, fragments of clothing preserved by whatever supernatural current flowed through this place. The physical remnants of those who had died here, animated by their collective fury. I had seconds, nothing more. I slammed the key into its depression on the altar and began reciting the binding ritual, my voice fighting against the cacophony of rage that filled the chamber. "By water bound, by metal sealed, return to depths what was revealed. The living realm denies your claim, the waters hold your death and name." The key sank into the altar as if the stone were liquid, then began to glow with blinding intensity. The phosphorescence throughout the chamber pulsed in response, changing from blue-green to a vibrant gold that seared my vision. "Spirits of the flood, heed this call, behind the veil once more you fall. What was taken now returned, the binding lock once more is turned." A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as the altar itself began to vibrate. Cracks appeared in the stone, not breaking it but revealing more of the golden light from within. The spirits shrieked in protest, their forms beginning to disintegrate at the edges, pulled toward the altar like smoke drawn to a flame. "I deny you passage, deny you voice, by my will and by my choice. Return to silence, return to sleep, the key is turned, the oath I keep." With the final words, I pressed my hand against the key, feeling it sink completely into the altar until my palm touched stone. A shock wave of golden light exploded outward, rippling through the water in a perfect sphere that passed through everything: the spirits, the chamber walls, my own body, leaving absolute stillness in its wake. For one heartbeat, the entire chamber was suspended in perfect silence. Then the water began to recede. It started slowly, a lowering of the waterline across the chamber, then accelerated with frightening speed. The spirits that had surrounded the platform were pulled downward, their forms stretching and distorting as they fought against the retreat of their watery medium. Their silent screams pressed against my mind as they were dragged back into the depths below the chamber. The woman thing reappeared briefly, her water face forming one last time before me. "You've condemned us to darkness again," she hissed, her voice fading. "But we are patient, Thomas Landry. The waters always rise eventually. Always find new cracks, new vessels. We will wait. We will remember." Then she too was gone, pulled into the vortex formed around the altar as the flood waters drained from the chamber with impossible speed. I clung to the altar as the platform beneath me shuddered violently. The columns around the perimeter began to crack and collapse, huge sections of the ceiling falling into the receding waters. The entire structure was collapsing inward, sealing itself. The way I had come was already gone, the spiral staircase now a pile of rubble. But as the waters continued to drain, they revealed something else, a narrow passage in the chamber wall, barely visible in the fading golden light, leading upward. An escape route, left by whoever had designed the binding altar. A final mercy for the one who turned the key. With the chamber disintegrating around me, I ran for the passage, diving into its narrow confines as the ceiling behind me gave way completely. The golden light was fading now, leaving me in near darkness as I crawled upward through the tight stone tunnel. Water still flowed around my ankles, but no longer illuminated with supernatural light. Just ordinary, muddy flood water, retreating back to wherever natural waters belonged. The whispers were gone. The weight of watching eyes lifted. Whatever consciousnesses had inhabited the flood had been bound once more by the key's return. The passage grew narrower, forcing me to squeeze through sections where the earth had shifted over centuries. My lungs burned, not with water now, but with a desperate need for air. The magical respiration granted by the spirits had vanished with their binding. Just as spots began to dance in my vision, my outstretched hand felt something different, not stone, but wood. A barrier. I pushed with my remaining strength, feeling it give slightly. With one final effort, I rammed my shoulder against the wood, feeling it splinter and crack. Cool night air rushed into the passage, reviving me enough for one more push that sent me tumbling through the opening into a basement. An ordinary residential basement, dimly lit by emergency lights, water pooled on the concrete floor but rapidly draining away through cracks and vents. I lay gasping on the wet floor, filling my lungs with blessed air, trying to process where the escape tunnel had led me. A stack of storage boxes nearby bore a familiar name, Kerrigan. I had emerged in William Kerrigan's basement, nearly a mile from where I had entered the floodwaters. The binding had not only sealed the spirits, but it connected me to the one person who understood what had happened. Footsteps on the stairs announced his arrival. He looked haggard, aged beyond the man I'd met hours earlier, but his eyes were clear with recognition. "You did it," he said simply, helping me to my feet. "The waters are receding across the city. It's over?" My voice was raw, my body beginning to register the toll of the night's impossible journey. Kerrigan's expression was solemn as he led me upstairs. "For now. But these cycles have happened before. My great-grandfather. His father before him. The key was turned, the waters bound, but never permanently. In his kitchen, he handed me a towel and gestured toward the window. Outside, emergency vehicles moved through streets still flooded but visibly draining. The rain had stopped completely, the clouds parting to reveal a night sky brilliant with stars. "How long?" I asked, knowing he would understand the question. "A generation, perhaps. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Water is patient, Professor Landry. And the dead have nothing but time." I sank into a chair, exhaustion claiming me at last. "Then someone else will have to do this again someday. Go down there, face them, return the key." "Yes," Kerrigan confirmed quietly. "When the waters rise again. When the whispers return." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "But that's a problem for another time. Tonight, they are bound. The city is safe. Safe, perhaps." But as I closed my eyes, I could still see them, the faces beneath the surface, watching, waiting in their watery prison. And I knew with absolute certainty that somewhere in the collapsed chambers beneath the city, the cycle had already begun again. The key was turning, slowly, imperceptibly. And the waters would rise once more. 2 months have passed since that night in the flooded catacombs. Summer has arrived in Westlake, bringing with it a relentless heat that has dried every trace of the supernatural floods. The city has rebuilt, repaired, rationalized away the inexplicable aspects of that night. Burst water mains, unprecedented rainfall, structural failures. The comfortable explanations of a world that prefers its mysteries neatly contained. I've given them what they want, an academic paper on the historical significance of the catacombs, carefully edited to exclude any mention of binding rituals or spirits in the water. The university has praised my work, unaware that their lauded professor of history now sleeps with the lights on and cannot bear to submerge himself in water. The catacombs have been sealed permanently by order of the city council, the entrance filled with concrete and marked with warnings about structural instability. An unremarkable plaque commemorates the site's historical significance. Nothing more. The city has moved on. But I cannot. Every night, I dream of the Chamber of Voices. Of pale faces watching from beneath dark waters. Of whispers that promise return. I wake gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that sometimes, in the darkness before dawn, seems to move with purpose across my skin. William Kerrigan understands. We meet weekly now, comparing notes, monitoring patterns. He's shown me his family's records, journals documenting each cycle of binding, each return of the waters, stretching back nearly 300 years. A legacy of secret guardians keeping watch over a supernatural prison that few believe exists. The signs usually begin subtly, he explained during our most recent meeting, his gnarled finger tracing entries in his great-grandfather's journal. Changes in the local water table. Unusual moisture patterns in buildings near the old waterways. Dreams of drowning among those sensitive to such things. How long do we have? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Decades, usually. But there are anomalies in the pattern. His expression grew troubled. The binding you performed was rushed, under duress, and the Chamber of Voices suffered structural collapse afterward. You think it might fail sooner? He didn't answer directly, merely turned to another page in the family records. My ancestors noted that the strength of the binding depends partly on the conviction of the one who turns the key, on their certainty. I remembered my moment of hesitation at the altar, the brief temptation to cast the key away instead. To free the spirits, to become their voice. Had that weakness compromised the binding? I did what was necessary, I said, as much to convince myself as him. Yes. But the waters remembers those who enter their domain, Professor Landry. And they are drawn to those who have heard their voices. That night, I returned to my apartment and found a small puddle in my bathroom where no leak could explain it. As I watched, the water moved, just slightly, just enough to form a pattern that might have been letters before evaporating completely. I've taken a sabbatical from the university. Officially, I'm writing a comprehensive historical analysis of Westlake's founding and early development. In reality, I'm preparing, gathering knowledge, collecting protective items similar to those Kerrigan provided, transcribing binding rituals and accounts of previous encounters with the spirits of the flood. Because I know now that I am marked. That night in the Chamber of Voices changed me in ways I'm still discovering. Sometimes, when I pass bodies of water, even something as innocent as a decorative fountain in the park, I see faces rippling beneath the surface, visible only to me. Acknowledging me. Remembering me. Last week, I received an email from Marcus, my assistant who had so fortuitously avoided the initial exploration of the catacombs. Professor, I've been having the strangest dreams lately. About water. About voices calling from somewhere deep below the city. I wake up with my sheets soaked through. Is this connected to what happened during the floods? Please call me. It's spreading, then. Those who have connections to me, to the site, to the history involved, the waters are reaching for them too. Preparing channels, creating conduits for when the binding eventually fails. Yesterday, I visited the market square where the entrance to the catacombs had been. The concrete seal looked solid, impenetrable. But as I stood watching, a single drop of water emerged from its center, impossible given the weeks of dry heat we've experienced. It traced a path down the rough surface before falling to the pavement at my feet. And in that tiny droplet, I swear I heard my name whispered with hateful familiarity. Tonight, I sit at my desk finalizing this account. Not for publication, no journal would accept it, no publisher would touch it without substantial editing to remove the supernatural elements. No, this is a record for whoever comes next. For whoever must face the chamber of voices when the waters rise again. Because they will rise. The binding will weaken. The key will turn. The cycle will continue, as it has for centuries. I've made arrangements with Kerrigan. When I die, hopefully many decades from now, of natural causes, my personal effects will pass to him or his descendants. Among them will be this manuscript and a sealed letter containing everything I remember about the binding ritual, the chamber's layout, the nature of the entities confined there. Knowledge that may help the next person who must descend into those depths. For now, I maintain my vigilance. I catalog every unexplained puddle, every water stain that appears on my walls only to vanish hours later. I document my dreams, comparing them with historical accounts in Kerrigan's family records, noting the similarities, the patterns, the warnings. And I avoid water whenever possible. The city has forgotten, as cities always do. People splash in public fountains, swim in the community pool, drink from glasses filled from their taps without the slightest awareness of what flows beneath the surface of their ordinary lives. But I remember. I hear the whispers in every raindrop, see the faces in every reflection. I know that somewhere far below, in a chamber now sealed by tons of collapsed stone, the spirits of the drowned are regathering their strength, testing the boundaries of their prison, remembering the taste of freedom they briefly experienced. Remembering me. Just last night, I woke to find my bathroom mirror fogged over despite the heat. Words had been traced in the condensation, visible only briefly before fading. Water finds a way. I did not approach the mirror. Did not wipe away the message. Simply closed the bathroom door, sealed the gap beneath it with a towel, and spent the remainder of the night in my armchair, lights blazing against the darkness. Because the truth I cannot escape, the knowledge that now defines my existence, is this: I may have turned the key, performed the binding, sealed the chamber of voices once more. But in doing so, I formed a connection that can never be broken. The waters touched me, changed me, marked me. Part of me remains in that flooded chamber, just as part of those ancient waters now flows through my veins. I am bound to them as surely as they are bound to their underwater prison. And when the waters rise again, whether in 10 years or 50, I fear I may find myself standing once more at the edge of the flood, drawn by forces I cannot resist, listening to the whispers of the drowned as they call me home to the depths. After all, water always finds a way. And the dead have nothing but time. Note found paperclip to the final page. Water stain appeared on ceiling today, directly above my bed, shaped like a handprint. The key is turning, faster than we thought. What would you do if the past refused to stay silent? The question lingered in my mind as I made my way down the narrow staircase leading to the university archives. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the aged wood protesting as though I was disturbing something that preferred to remain undisturbed. My name is Daniel Foster, a doctoral candidate in historical linguistics, and I have been granted special access to the restricted section of the archives to research my dissertation on lost dialects of the early colonial period. The archives were housed in the basement of Blackwell Hall, the oldest building on campus, dating back to the late 18th century. The university had preserved much of its original architecture: stone walls, low ceilings supported by dark wooden beams, and small windows that allowed minimal natural light to penetrate the space. Modern fluorescent lights had been installed, but they seemed to struggle against the building's natural gloom, casting sickly pale light that somehow made the shadows deeper. Professor Lawrence, my advisor, had warned me about the disorganization. "Nobody's properly cataloged those materials since the 60s, he'd said, handing me the set of heavy iron keys. "You'll find the colonial documents in the eastern wing, but don't expect much order. And Daniel," he added, his voice dropping, "try to finish before evening. The building's electronic systems are being upgraded, and the power might be unreliable." As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the familiar scent of old paper and leather bindings greeted me, a smell I normally found comforting. Today, however, there was something else beneath it, something vaguely metallic and organic, like copper pennies left too long in a damp pocket. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The archives stretched before me, row upon row of metal shelving filled with boxes, folders, and leather-bound volumes. Dust particles danced in the shafts of light from the small ground-level windows. It was quiet, too quiet. The thick stone walls muffled any sounds from the campus outside, creating a pocket of silence that felt almost tangible. Setting my laptop and notebook on a wooden table that looked as old as the building itself, I began my search. The eastern wing, as Professor Lawrence had mentioned, contained several shelving units labeled Colonial Administration and Settlement Records. I pulled out a box labeled 1723 to 1745 Correspondence. The first few hours passed productively. I found several letters written in a fascinating dialect that mixed English with influences from Dutch and Native American languages. I documented my discoveries, photographed key documents, and made detailed notes. Outside, the afternoon sun began to sink lower, the already dim light in the archives fading further. That's when I first noticed it, a soft rustling sound from deeper within the archives. I paused, listening intently. Perhaps another researcher? But Professor Lawrence had assured me I would be alone. Special permission had been required because the archives were officially closed for inventory. "Hello?" My voice sounded oddly muted, as though the air itself was absorbing the sound. No response. Probably mice, I reasoned, returning to my work. The building was old enough to house several generations of rodents. Another hour passed. I had moved onto a collection of journals when I found something unusual, a slim volume bound in dark leather that seemed out of place among the official documents. Unlike the orderly script of the administrative records, these pages were filled with frantic, uneven handwriting that slanted across the pages with desperate energy. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Winthrop, who had served as a clerk in the settlement of Millbrook in 1741. As I began reading, a cold draft curled around my ankles. I glanced up, noticing for the first time that one of the small windows was cracked open. That would explain the draft, but not the soft whispering sound that now seemed to emanate from between the shelves, too articulated for mice, too subtle for another person. Winthrop's journal was fascinating. He wrote of strange occurrences in the settlement, voices heard in the forest that spoke words from no known language, settlers who wandered into the woods and returned changed, speaking of the others who lived between the trees. Most disturbing was his account of discovering ancient documents in a cave, written in what he described as symbols that moved when not observed directly. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. The power issues Professor Lawrence had mentioned. I checked my watch, 5:47 p.m. I still had time before the full darkness of evening. Turning the page, I found that Winthrop's handwriting had deteriorated further, becoming nearly illegible. Squinting to make out the words, I became so absorbed that I barely registered the soft footsteps that seemed to pace the aisle behind me until they stopped directly at my back. I turned quickly, heart pounding. No one was there. But the whispers were louder now, multiple voices overlapping in what sounded like urgent conversation, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. The sound seemed to be coming from the journal itself, the pages rustling though there was no wind in the sealed archive. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. The fluorescent lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the archives into momentary darkness. When they came back on, I noticed something had changed. A box on the shelf opposite me had been pulled out slightly, though I was certain it had been flush with the others before. My hands trembled as I turned back to Winthrop's journal. The last legible entry read, "They speak through the records of our lives. The words we leave behind become vessels for their voices. God help anyone who listens too closely to what was never meant to be heard." The whispers grew more insistent now, and I realized with mounting horror that I could almost understand them, almost. They seemed to be speaking in the same strange dialect I had been researching, words flowing and blending in an unnatural rhythm. The lights flickered once more, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt something cold brush across the back of my neck, like fingers, but too dry, too papery. When the lights returned, a page from Winthrop's journal had turned, revealing a passage I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was different now, sharper, more angular, nothing like the desperate scrawl from before. "You see us now, Daniel Foster. We have waited so long for new eyes to find us. My name written in a journal from 1741. I slammed the book shut, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. All around me, the whispers were rising, papers rustling on shelves that I couldn't see. The archive no longer felt like a repository of historical documents. It felt alive, awakening to my presence, to my attention. The lights went out completely this time. In the sudden darkness, I heard the unmistakable sound of pages turning, not just one book, but dozens, hundreds of pages turning in the darkness, a dry, rushing sound like countless wings beating the air. And beneath it all, a single voice, clearer than the rest, whispered in my ear. "What would you do if the past refused to stay silent? You're about to find out." Have you ever felt words crawl beneath your skin? I stumbled backwards, colliding with the shelving unit behind me. In the darkness, my hand fumbled for my phone, finally finding it in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I activated the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a knife. The narrow cone of light revealed nothing unusual, just rows of shelves, boxes of documents, the table where my laptop still sat. But the whispering continued, now seeming to recede deeper into the archives, as though inviting me to follow. "This isn't happening," I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. "This is sleep deprivation or some kind of hallucination from mold spores." The logical part of my brain, the scholar, the academic, desperately tried to assert control. Old buildings had strange acoustics. The wind through the cracked window could create odd sounds that the mind interpreted as voices. The journal with my name was surely a misreading, a coincidence, or my eyes playing tricks in the poor light. Yet when I directed my phone's beam toward the table, Winthrop's journal lay open once more, though I distinctly remembered closing it. Against my better judgment, I approached the table, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The pages fluttered slightly, as though disturbed by a breath, though there was no draft I could feel. My flashlight revealed new writing appearing on the page, not written by a physical hand, but forming as though the ink was rising from within the paper itself, dark stains spreading to form letters in that same sharp, angular script. Your tongue remembers us, Daniel. The words you study, they are our words. Our stories. Our binding. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. I backed away from the journal, only to bump into something solid behind me, something that hadn't been there a moment before. Spinning around, I raised my light. Nothing but empty space. Yet I had felt it, something substantial, something with presence and weight. Hello? I called again, my voice sounding small and ineffectual in the vast darkness. Is someone playing a joke? In response, the whispering intensified, multiple voices now, their words overlapping in a cacophony that seemed to press against my eardrums. And for the first time, I could understand fragments of what they were saying. Found US again. The binding weakens. He speaks the old tongue. Take him. With a sudden surge of panic, I grabbed my laptop, shoved Winthrop's journal into my bag, and made for the door. I had to get out, had to find light and air in the reassuring sounds of the modern world. The beam of my flashlight darted frantically across the shelves as I navigated the maze-like aisles. Had the archives always been this large? This convoluted? I couldn't seem to find the main passage that led to the exit. Each turn brought me deeper into the stacks, past shelves I didn't recognize, containing boxes and volumes with labels I couldn't read in the dim light. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, until my breath formed small clouds in front of my face. The whispers followed, sometimes fading, sometimes surging louder, as though the voices were moving around me, circling, herding me deeper into the archives. Finally, my light fell upon a door, not the main entrance I had used, but a smaller door set into the far wall. I had never noticed it before, but at that moment, any exit seemed better than remaining in the oppressive darkness with those voices. I rushed toward it, grasped the handle, and pulled. The door opened with surprising ease, revealing not the hallway or staircase I had expected, but another room, a small, circular chamber lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. Unlike the organized boxes of the main archives, these shelves held loose papers, scrolls, and odd artifacts, bone fragments inscribed with unfamiliar symbols, small carved figurines, and what looked like pieces of preserved skin stretched over wooden frames, covered in the same angular script I had seen in the journal. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it, an open book much larger than Winthrop's journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed for retreat. But the whispering had ceased the moment I entered this room, the sudden silence more unnerving than the voices had been. And there was something about the book on the pedestal, something that compelled attention. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me toward it. The flashlight revealed text in multiple languages, Latin, Greek, Early English, and others I couldn't identify. But interspersed throughout were passages in the same dialect I had been researching, the lost language of the early settlers and their mysterious influences. The title page bore a single phrase, lexicon of the spaces between. As I stared at the book, trying to decipher its purpose, a sound behind me made me whirl around. The door through which I had entered was swinging shut. I lunged for it, but too late, it closed with a soft click that somehow carried terrible finality. There was no handle on this side. Trapped, I turned back to the pedestal, the book now the only object of interest in my confinement. With no other options, I began to read, translating the passages I could understand. The book described entities that existed between words and meanings, beings that could inhabit human language, using written and spoken words as vessels to enter our world. The more text was read, the stronger their presence became. The more language was spoken, the more power they gained. But texts that were forgotten, languages that died, trapped these entities, binding them in the unread words and unspoken sounds. A terrible realization dawned on me. My research, my work on reviving lost dialects, was it somehow weakening these bindings? The temperature in the room plummeted further. My flashlight being weakened, the battery draining unnaturally fast. In the fading light, I noticed something horrifying. The scattered papers on the shelves were moving, rustling not like paper disturbed by air, but like living things, curling and uncurling, edges lifting like fingers reaching outward. And on the walls, the shadows were deepening, taking form, humanoid silhouettes that seemed to step forward from the shelves, composed not of darkness but of something that absorbed light, consumed it. My flashlight died completely, plunging the room into absolute blackness. But I could still sense movement around me, could feel the air displacing as things shifted position, drawing closer. A voice spoke directly beside my ear, so close I could feel the words as vibrations against my skin. "You have such a beautiful voice, Daniel. Speak for us. Read to us. Set us free." Something cold and dry, like paper, like parchment, wrapped around my wrist. I screamed, yanking my arm away, stumbling backward until I collided with the pedestal, nearly toppling the ancient book. As if in response to my touch, the book began to glow, emitting a pale blue light that illuminated the room just enough for me to see the horror surrounding me. The papers had coalesced into vaguely human forms, manuscripts folded and twisted into limbs and torsos, pages forming faces with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. They moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking, closing in from all sides. The nearest reached for me with arms made of rolled parchment, its face a palimpsest of overlapping texts in dozens of languages. I could see words written on what served as its skin, words that moved and rearranged themselves as I watched. In desperate panic, I seized the glowing book from the pedestal and held it before me like a shield. The paper creatures recoiled, the light seeming to cause them pain. Using this momentary advantage, I charged toward where the door had been, the book held high. The paper beings parted, shrinking from the light, but I could feel their hunger, their desperation to touch, to take, to absorb. My shoulders slammed into the wall where I thought the door had been, but instead of solid resistance, I felt it give way. The wall itself seemed to tear like paper, and I fell through into darkness. I tumbled down what felt like stairs, the book clutched tightly to my chest, its light illuminating a narrow stone staircase I had never seen before. Behind me, the sound of rustling paper grew louder, the whispering returned, more urgent, angry now. "Bring it back. The binding. He takes our vessel. Stop him." I ran blindly down the stairs, the steps uneven and treacherous. The book's glow provided just enough light to avoid falling, but shadows danced at the edge of vision, paper-thin silhouettes pursuing me down the staircase. At the bottom, I found another door, ancient but reinforced with iron bands. With the last of my strength, I pushed it open and fell through into the surprising brightness of the university hallway. Two maintenance workers looked up in shock as I collapsed on the polished floor, the glowing book now fading to ordinary paper in the fluorescent lighting. "Hey, you okay, man?" one of them asked, helping me to my feet. "Where'd you come from?" "That door's been bricked up for years." I turned to look behind me. Where I had expected to see the open door and the staircase beyond, there was only solid wall, the outline of a doorway visible only as a slightly different shade of paint. I was in the archives, I managed to stammer. Eastern wing. The workers exchanged glances. Archives don't have an eastern wing, the second worker said slowly. Just north and south sections. As for the 40 years I've worked here. I stood there, clutching the ancient book, my bag with Winthrop's journal still slung over my shoulder, unable to form a coherent response. What time is it? I finally asked. Just past 9, the first worker replied. Building's closing soon. You should probably head home, get some rest. You don't look so good. 9 o'clock. I had entered the archives just after noon. Where had those hours gone? I nodded vaguely and made my way out of the building on unsteady legs, the night air cool against my clammy skin. Campus was quiet, just a few students crossing the quad, their laughter sounding distant and unreal. Under a street lamp, I examined the book I had taken from the pedestal. In normal light, it looked unremarkable, old, certainly, but not ancient, not glowing, not magical. Just a weathered volume with a plain leather cover, the title now reading simply Linguistic Anomalies of the Colonial Period. But when I opened it, a slip of paper fell out, a note written in fresh ink in that same sharp, angular handwriting. You cannot escape us now, Daniel. You have brought us home with you. We live in your words, in your thoughts. And soon, we will speak through you. As if to confirm this horror, I felt something stir within my mind, like words forming in a language I almost understood, thoughts that were not my own taking shape behind my eyes. I slammed the book shut and ran toward my apartment, knowing already it was too late. The shadows on the pavement seemed to move independently of the objects casting them, flowing like ink across the concrete. And all around me, though there was no one near, I could hear whispers, paper-dry voices speaking in that lost dialect I had worked so hard to understand. Now I understood too well. The words I had been researching weren't just a linguistic curiosity. They were cages. And I had just unlocked the doors. Have you ever spoken words that didn't feel like your own? I slammed my apartment door shut and engaged every lock, the deadbolt, the chain, even the rarely used security bar that wedged under the doorknob. As if physical barriers could keep out what I'd already invited in. My studio apartment had never felt smaller, the walls closing in with each labored breath I took. Books lined every surface, textbooks, research materials, linguistic journals, each one suddenly sinister, potentially harboring words that could, what? Come alive? Possess me? The rational part of my mind still fought against accepting what I'd experienced. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and placed the ancient book beside it, then stepped back, staring at the innocuous-looking volume as though it might sprout teeth. This isn't happening, I said aloud, desperate to hear a human voice, even my own. I had some kind of episode. Sleep deprivation. Stress. But my words sounded hollow, my voice slightly wrong, the cadence off, the pronunciation of certain syllables altered in subtle ways I could feel but not correct. The book sat there, challenging my denial. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call Professor Lawrence. He would know what to make of this. He had studied the colonial period for decades. Surely he had encountered references to these phenomena. As I scrolled to his contact, my screen flickered, the display momentarily replaced by lines of text in that same angular script I had seen in the archives. It lasted only a second before returning to normal, but it was enough to make me drop the phone as though it had burned me. I backed away until I hit the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, knees drawn to my chest. What was happening to me? My gaze fell on Winthrop's journal, which had slipped out of my bag onto the counter. It lay closed, but even from across the room, I could see its pages ruffling gently, as though stirred by a breeze, though the air in my apartment was completely still. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I found myself standing, moving toward the journal, compelled by something beyond curiosity. The need to know, to understand, overrode my fear. With a deep breath, I opened Winthrop's journal again, turning to where I had left off. The frantic handwriting had given way entirely to that sharp, angular script. The words have their own will, their own desires. They choose their vessels with care. Those who study them, those who speak them, those who give them life again after centuries of silence. You are not the first, Daniel Foster. Others have found us before. Others have carried us from the darkness. Others have given us voice. But you are special. Your mind holds the patterns of so many languages, so many vessels for us to inhabit. As I read, I became aware of a soft sound filling my apartment, the rustle of pages turning. Not just from Winthrop's journal, but from every book on my shelves. I looked up to see all my books, dozens of them, their pages flipping rapidly as though caught in a strong wind. And on those fluttering pages, words were changing, but printed text flowing and reforming into new patterns, new languages. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The room seemed to tilt and spin. I gripped the counter for support, but my hand slipped across something slick, ink, black and viscous, seeping from the pages of Winthrop's journal, pooling on the countertop. The ink moved with purpose, flowing not downward with gravity, but curling and twisting to form words. Speak us. Release us. We have been trapped for so long. My tongue felt thick, foreign in my mouth. Words pressed against my lips, demanding utterance, words in that lost dialect, sounds my mouth knew how to shape but my mind barely comprehended. I clamped a hand over my mouth, muffling the syllables that tried to force their way out. Whatever these entities were, they wanted me to speak them into existence, to give them form through language. With tremendous effort, I staggered to my bathroom, flicked on the harsh fluorescent light, and confronted my reflection in the mirror. The face that stared back was mine, but not entirely. My eyes were darker, the pupils expanded until almost no iris remained. And when I reluctantly removed my hand from my mouth, I saw with horror that my tongue was stained black, as though soaked in ink. Behind my reflection, shadows moved on the bathroom wall, elongated silhouettes that bore no relation to my actual form. They stretched and contorted, taking shapes that were almost human but wrongly proportioned, with too many limbs or misplaced features. One shadow detached itself from the wall, stepping into three-dimensional space while remaining completely flat, a paper-thin darkness that moved with jerky, unnatural motions. It approached my reflection in the mirror, placing what might have been a hand on my mirrored shoulder. I felt the pressure, cold and dry, on my actual shoulder. With a strangled cry, I spun around. The bathroom was empty of anything but ordinary shadows cast by the light fixture. Yet when I turned back to the mirror, the shadow figure remained, now standing directly behind me, its featureless face inches from my ear. We have waited so long, it whispered, its voice the sound of pages turning. So many years in the darkness, in the silence. But you found us. You remembered us. And now we remember you. I fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind me, though I knew such barriers meant nothing to these entities. In the living area, the situation had deteriorated further. Books had fallen from shelves, their pages torn free, swirling through the air like autumn leaves. And on each page, The text was changing, flowing, becoming that same angular script. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe, as though the atmosphere itself was becoming saturated with words, with meanings never meant for human comprehension. My laptop screen flared to life without being touched, document after document opening, the text transforming before my eyes, my research notes, my dissertation draft, all converting to that ancient script. With sudden clarity, I realized what was happening. These entities, whatever they were, fed on attention, on comprehension. Each text I read strengthened them. Each word I understood gave them greater hold over my mind. I had to stop reading, had to avoid looking at any text. But it was too late. The words were everywhere, floating on loose pages, appearing on my digital screens, even forming in condensation on my windows. And I couldn't help but read them, my trained linguist's mind automatically parsing and interpreting, giving them power with each syllable I comprehended. The pressure in my head built, a migraine of otherworldly proportions. Images flashed behind my eyes, ancient forests where the trees were inscribed with symbols that moved and changed, caves where wall paintings shifted position when not directly observed, early settlements where colonists spoke with mouths that formed impossible sounds. These weren't just my visions. They were memories, not mine, but theirs. The entities were sharing their experiences, their history. They had been here before Europeans arrived, inhabiting the languages of indigenous peoples. When colonists came, bringing new languages, the entities found new vessels, new means of expression. But as native languages died out and dialects standardized, many of the entities were trapped in forgotten tongues, bound in unread texts and unspoken words. Until someone like me came along, a researcher dedicated to reviving those lost forms of communication. I had become a bridge between worlds, between times, between meanings. The loose pages were spinning faster now, forming a vortex in the center of my living room. Within that whirlwind, a form was taking shape, not a shadow this time, but something constructed of paper and ink, countless pages folding and combining into a roughly humanoid figure. Its face formed last, a blank page that suddenly filled with features drawn in dark ink, hollow eyes, a mouth that opened too wide, revealing not teeth but line after line of tiny script. "Stop!" I shouted, but my voice emerged wrong, the vowels elongated, the consonants clicking in patterns of that colonial dialect. The paper construct cocked its head, studying me with inked-out eyes. "You fight us still," it said, its voice the sound of 1,000 pages turning at once. "But you are already part of us. The words live in you now. They swim in your blood. They nest in your brain." It stepped closer, leaving ink footprints on my hardwood floor. "We need a true voice again. Not just paper and ink. We need flesh and breath and bone. We need you, Daniel Foster." It reached for me with arms made of folded manuscripts, fingers of curled parchment. I backed away until I hit my desk, my hand blindly groping behind me for anything to use as a weapon. My fingers closed around my lighter, an old Zippo I kept for lighting the occasional candle. In a moment of desperate inspiration, I flicked it open and ignited the flame. The paper construct hesitated, its blank face registering something like concern. "Stay back," I warned, holding the flame before me. "Or I'll burn every page, every book, every word you're using to manifest." The construct's ink-drawn mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "Burn them all," it whispered. "It won't matter. We're already inside you. The words are already yours." To demonstrate its point, it reached into its own chest and pulled forth a sheaf of papers, my research notes, I realized with horror. It held them to the flame emanating from my lighter. The pages caught fire immediately, curling and blackening. But as they burned, I felt a searing pain in my own chest, as though the flame was consuming me from within. I dropped the lighter with a cry of agony, clutching at my sternum. The construct continued burning the pages, and with each one that turned to ash, I felt something vital being scorched away, memories, knowledge, parts of myself. They weren't just destroying my research. They were burning away pieces of my identity, making room for themselves. Through the haze of pain, a desperate plan formed. If these entities fed on attention and comprehension, then perhaps the opposite would weaken them. Deliberate incomprehension. Linguistic confusion. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, opened a translation app, and began to speak, first in English, then listening to the translation in Japanese, repeating those words, then translating to Russian, to Arabic, to Swahili, creating a chain of mutual incomprehension, deliberately mingling pronunciations, creating semantic noise. The effect was immediate. The paper construct shuddered, its form becoming less stable. The swirling pages faltered in their rotation. The pressure in my head eased slightly. Encouraged, I continued, adding random syllables, creating nonsense words, destroying meaning systematically. I chanted nursery rhymes backward, recited prime numbers, anything to disrupt the patterns of language that gave these entities power. The construct was deteriorating now, pages falling away from its form, ink running like tears down its disintegrating face. "Stop," it pleaded, its voice distorting. "You're unmaking us. You're sending us back to the silence, to the darkness." But I couldn't stop. My survival depended on this linguistic exorcism. I kept speaking, a stream of consciousness with no structure, no grammar, no meaning, pure sound divorced from sense. The vortex of pages collapsed, loose sheets falling to the floor. The construct folded on itself, collapsing into a pile of ordinary paper. The shadows retreated to their proper places, cast by physical objects in relation to light sources, nothing more. Gradually, the pressure in my head subsided. The blackness faded from my tongue. My books settled back into their normal state, the text no longer shifting and changing. I stood in the center of my devastated apartment, surrounded by scattered papers and fallen books, breathing heavily. Had I succeeded? Were they gone? As if in answer, my phone screen lit up with a text message notification. From an unknown number, a single line of text. "Words are patient, Daniel. And we have all the time in the world." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then sank to the floor amidst the debris of my encounter, uncertain if I had won a victory or merely a temporary reprieve. Outside my window, the night pressed close, shadows moving in patterns that might have been ordinary, might have been something else entirely. And somewhere in the back of my mind, words continued to form in that lost dialect, quieter now, but still present, still waiting. They were right about one thing: I had brought them home with me. And I wasn't sure I would ever be free of them again. Have you ever felt your thoughts being overwritten? I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. Each time my exhaustion threatened to pull me under, those whispers would surge in volume, words crawling through my mind like insects, seeking control while my consciousness ebbed. By dawn, my apartment looked like a war zone. I had spent the night constructing defenses, linguistic barricades against the invasion in my mind. My walls were covered with incomprehensible text, mathematical equations, random strings of letters, sheet music, binary code, anything that carried information without conventional meaning, creating a cacophony of semantic noise to keep the entities at bay. My hands were stained with ink, my voice hoarse from hours of reciting tongue twisters and nonsense syllables whenever the whispers grew too loud. The strategy was working, but barely, and I knew I couldn't maintain it indefinitely. I needed help. As soon as it was a reasonable hour, I called Professor Lawrence. The phone rang 5 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Daniel? What time is it?" 7:15, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry to call so early, but I need to speak with you. It's about my research. About the archives." A pause. "Are you all right? You sound different." Did I? I couldn't tell anymore what was normal and what wasn't. My own voice had become suspect, potentially compromised. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just didn't get much sleep." "Can I see you today?" "It's urgent." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, becoming more formal, guarded. "Of course. My office hours start at 10. Come by then." The call ended, leaving me with the distinct impression that something was wrong with our conversation. Had Professor Lawrence sensed the entities hovering at the edges of my words? Or was I becoming paranoid, seeing threats everywhere? I spent the next 2 hours preparing myself. I showered, scrubbing furiously at the ink stains on my hands, though some remained stubbornly embedded in the whorls of my fingerprints. I dressed in clean clothes, made coffee, ate a slice of toast I couldn't taste. Normalcy is armor. Routine is protection. Before leaving, I gathered what I needed: Winthrop's journal, the ancient book from the pedestal, my laptop with its corrupted files. Evidence. Proof. I wasn't going to Lawrence empty-handed. The campus was busy with morning classes, students hurrying across the quad, laughing, talking, gloriously unaware. For a moment, I envied their ignorance, their untroubled relationship with words, mere tools for communication, not vessels for ancient horrors. As I crossed the humanities building's threshold, a strange sensation overcame me. The architecture seemed to shift subtly, corridors stretching longer than I remembered, shadows deepening in corners where no darkness should exist. Was this real, or were the entities distorting my perception? Professor Lawrence's office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway lined with faculty nameplates. I hesitated outside his door, suddenly uncertain. What if he didn't believe me? Worse, what if he already knew? I knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed oddly in the hallway. "Come in, Daniel." His voice sounded normal enough. The office was as I remembered it: book-lined walls, a massive oak desk, the perpetual smell of pipe tobacco though Lawrence hadn't smoked in years. The professor himself sat behind his desk, gray-haired and bespectacled, his face betraying nothing but mild academic interest. "You look terrible," he said simply. I collapsed into the chair opposite him, dropping my bag containing the evidence on the floor beside me. "Something happened in the archives," I began, my voice catching. "Something impossible." Lawrence studied me for a long moment, then reached into his desk drawer. I tensed, irrationally expecting a weapon, but he withdrew only a small leather-bound book. "You found the lexicon," he said quietly. "And Winthrop's journal." The shock must have shown on my face. "How did you?" "I've been waiting decades for someone to find them again," Lawrence interrupted, his voice taking on a new timbre, reverent, almost worshipful. "The signs were all there in your dissertation proposal. Your interest in that particular dialect, your intuitive grasp of its structure. They chose you long before you entered those archives, Daniel." Ice formed in my stomach. "They?" Lawrence smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "The listeners in the ink. the dwellers between words. They have many names and many texts. He opened the small book on his desk, and I recognized the angular script immediately. You know about them, I whispered. Know them? I serve them, Lawrence corrected. As did my mentor before me, and is before him. Someone must tend to the vessel. Vessel? My mouth had gone dry. Lawrence gestured at the books lining his office. Every text is a potential doorway. Every reader a potential host. But some minds are more suitable than others. Linguists, philologists, scholars of dead languages were particularly receptive. His eyes gleamed with fervor. And you, Daniel, are exceptional. Your mind spans so many linguistic frameworks, so many conceptual schemas. You are the perfect vessel they've been waiting for. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting the urge to flee. Why are you telling me this? Because fighting them is futile. I tried decades ago. We all do, at first. Lawrence's voice softened with what sounded like genuine sympathy. The headaches will get worse. The whispers, louder. You'll start losing time, moments, then hours, then days. You'll find yourself writing words you don't remember composing, speaking phrases and languages you never studied. As if summoned by his description, pain lanced through my skull, and the whispers surged like a tide, words in that colonial dialect flooding my consciousness. Lawrence noticed my wince. They're speaking to you now, aren't they? What are they saying? I shook my head violently, refusing to translate, to give voice to the alien concepts pressing against my thoughts. Lawrence sighed. I'm trying to help you, Daniel. There are only two paths forward. Resistance will drive you mad within weeks. Acceptance offers a different kind of existence. Not entirely human anymore, perhaps, but not without rewards. What rewards? I asked bitterly. Becoming a puppet for ancient monsters? Knowledge, Lawrence answered simply. Understanding beyond human comprehension. They've existed between words since language began. They've witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, preserved wisdom lost to time. He leaned forward intently. Think of what you could learn, what you could become. For a treacherous moment, I felt temptation. The academic in me, the scholar, the seeker of knowledge, that part wavered. But then I remembered the paper construct in my apartment, the burning sensation as it consumed pieces of my identity. No, I said firmly. I won't surrender my mind. There has to be another way. Lawrence's expression hardened. I had hoped you would be reasonable. The transition is easier that way. He stood, moving to lock his office door. But they will have you, willing or not. My hand moved to my bag, seeking a weapon, a tool, anything, and closed around Winthrop's journal. Wait, I said desperately. Winthrop fought them too, didn't he? That's why his writing changed. He was being taken over. Lawrence paused. Winthrop was weak. He didn't understand what was happening to him. But he wrote something about binding them, about words becoming vessels. My mind raced, connecting fragments. If words can trap them, there must be a method to strengthen those traps, not just break them. Something flickered across Lawrence's face, fear, perhaps. Don't pursue this line of thinking, Daniel. For your own sake. But his reaction told me I was onto something. The entities didn't just want to be read, to be spoken, they needed to be understood. Comprehension was the key to their freedom. and incomprehension might be their prison. I stood suddenly, backing toward the window. The binding weakens, I quoted from the whispers I'd heard in the archives. That's what they said. They're trapped in forgotten words, in dead languages. Every time someone like me translates those words, understands them. Daniel, Lawrence warned, advancing slowly, you're dabbling in forces you can't comprehend. That's exactly the point, I replied, a desperate plan forming. They feed on comprehension. Winthrop knew how to trap them, and so do I. Before Lawrence could reach me, I yanked the ancient book from my bag, the lexicon of the spaces between, and held it toward the window, the morning sunlight illuminating its pages. No! Lawrence lunged forward. But I had already begun, not reading the text as it was written, but deliberately mistranslating it, introducing errors, corrupting the meanings, creating a cacophony of misinterpretations. I mangled pronunciations, switched syntactic structures, scrambled semantic fields, using my linguistic training not to understand, but to systematically destroy meaning. The effect was immediate and violent. The air in the office seemed to ripple, books trembling on their shelves. Lawrence collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and screaming, not in his voice, but in a chorus of paper-dry whispers. The whispers in my own mind rose to a shriek, then began to fragment, losing coherence as I continued my assault on meaning itself. I felt something tearing loose from my consciousness, ripping away like bandages from a wound, painful but purifying. Pages from the lexicon began to blacken and curl at the edges, not burning but aging rapidly, disintegrating into dust. Similar decay spread to the books on Lawrence's shelves, particularly the older volumes, their leather bindings cracking, pages dissolving. Stop! Lawrence begged, ink-black tears streaming down his face. You're killing them. You're killing us. But I couldn't stop. My survival, myself, depended on completing this linguistic exorcism. I continued my deliberate destruction of meaning, feeling the entities losing their grip on my mind with each corrupted translation. The windows shattered outward, a pressure wave of semantic discharge. Papers whirled around the room like a cyclone, their text blurring and fading. Lawrence collapsed completely, his body convulsing as ink poured from his eyes, his nose, his mouth, black fluid that moved with purpose, forming symbols on the floor that instantly dissolved into meaningless stains. After what seemed like hours but must have been only minutes, silence fell. The whispers in my mind had ceased. The oppressive presence that had haunted me since entering the archives was gone, leaving a blessed emptiness in its wake. Lawrence lay motionless on the floor. I rushed to check his pulse, weak but present. His skin was ashen, drained of vitality, but as I watched, color slowly returned to his face. His eyes fluttered open, clear for perhaps the first time in decades. Daniel, he whispered, his voice his own again. What happened? I broke the binding, I explained softly. Not the one trapping them, but the one connecting them to us. Lawrence's eyes widened with understanding, then filled with tears. How long have they been in me? Decades, you said. He nodded weakly. I feel empty. And yet, somehow complete again. He clutched my arm suddenly. But they're not gone, Daniel. Never think that. I've studied them my entire career. They cannot be destroyed, only contained. In forgotten words, I said. In unread texts. Yes. Lawrence struggled to sit up. And they'll find new vessels eventually. New minds to infiltrate. This is only a respite. I helped him to his chair, surveying the devastation of his office. Most of his books were ruined, reduced to aged, brittle paper or dust. The lexicon in my hands had diminished to little more than a cover holding disintegrated fragments. Winthrop's journal, however, remained intact, a primary source, a warning for future generations. "What now?" I asked. Lawrence looked suddenly old, the weight of decades of possession lifting to reveal the toll it had taken. "Now we protect what we've learned. Document everything, the entities, their methods, the way to break their hold. Won't writing it down risk creating new vessels for them?" He smiled weakly. "Not if we encode our findings. Use deliberate errors, linguistic tripwires that only make sense to someone who already knows the truth. Create a map that can only be followed by those already free of influence." I nodded slowly, understanding. A text that resists comprehension rather than invites it. Exactly. Lawrence's eyes gleamed with something like hope. "We create our own binding, Daniel. Stronger than theirs." In the weeks that followed, that's exactly what we did. Lawrence took a sudden sabbatical, citing health concerns that weren't entirely fabricated. I temporarily abandoned my dissertation to work with him, creating a new kind of text, a guidebook for future scholars who might encounter these entities, written in a deliberately complex cipher that required specific knowledge to decode. We worked in a small cabin in the mountains, far from the university archives, surrounded by modern books on modern subjects, nothing old, nothing forgotten, nothing that might harbor remnants of those ancient presences. The headaches faded. The whispers remained silent. Slowly, I reclaimed pieces of myself that had been overridden, though certain gaps remained, memories lost during those hours in the archives that would never return. Lawrence recovered more slowly, his longer possession leaving deeper scars. Sometimes I would find him staring at blank pages, his hand moving as though writing invisible text. Other times, he would speak random syllables in his sleep, fragments of languages long dead. But each day, these episodes grew less frequent. By winter, our work was complete, linguistic anomalies and semantic parasites, a protected study by Lawrence and Foster. We published only 3 copies, one for each of us, and one sealed in a lead-lined box and buried beneath the cabin's floorboards, protected by symbolic wards from a dozen different cultures. Not magic, I still couldn't believe in such things, but pattern. Structure. Deliberate linguistic confusion designed to repel entities that fed on meaning. I returned to the university to complete my dissertation, shifting my focus from colonial dialects to modern linguistic drift, safer territory, devoid of forgotten words that might harbor ancient presences. Sometimes, late at night, I still found myself checking my tongue in the mirror, paranoid about ink stains that never reappeared. Occasionally, reading a particularly old text, I would feel a whisper of familiarity, a tickle at the edge of comprehension, and would quickly close the book. And sometimes, in dreams, I would return to that circular room in the archives, where papers moved with purpose and shadows spoke with human voices. But they were just dreams now, not visitations. The entities were still out there, I had no doubt, waiting in forgotten manuscripts, in lost languages, in words no living person understood. Waiting for another scholar, another linguist, another vessel to give them voice. But when that happened, and it would happen, there would be a defense. A method. A way back from the spaces between words. I keep Winthrop's journal locked in a fireproof safe, a reminder and a warning. Its final pages contain an entry in my own handwriting, addressed to whoever might find it next. Words have power beyond their meaning. Some words are cages. Some words are keys. Learn to tell the difference, or you may find yourself speaking with a voice that is not your own. Have you ever felt words try to read you back? Have you ever felt like a place remembers you, even though you've never been there before? The taxi dropped me off at the entrance of the Blackwood Grand Hotel, its imposing Victorian facade looming against the darkening sky. Rain had started to fall, gentle at first but quickly becoming more insistent, forcing me to hurry up the cracked stone steps with my suitcase in tow. I wasn't supposed to be here, not at this forgotten place on the edge of town, certainly not alone. But the conference hotel had overbooked, and the apologetic clerk had arranged alternative accommodation with historical charm. Historical was right. The Blackwood Grand must have been magnificent once, but now it stood as a weathered monument to faded elegance. Renovations were apparently underway, but I saw no evidence of construction equipment or workers as I approached the heavy wooden doors. "Hello?" I called out as I entered the dimly lit lobby. My voice echoed across marble floors and bounced off ornate crown molding. A massive chandelier hung overhead, only half of its bulbs working, casting strange, elongated shadows across the reception area. The air felt thick, somehow heavier than it should be, carrying the scent of old books and something else, something floral but sickly sweet, like perfume worn by a person long gone. "Coming, coming," a voice called from somewhere behind the massive oak reception desk. A moment later, an elderly man appeared, his movements quick and bird-like. "You must be Mr. Harrison. We've been expecting you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, which remained fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "That's right, Thomas Harrison," I confirmed, trying to ignore the chill that crept up my spine when he said they had been expecting me. "I believe the Westmore Conference Center made arrangements." Indeed. "We have your room ready. The Preston Suite on the 3rd floor. One of our finest." He pushed the guest book toward me, and I noticed his hands were spotted with age but steady as he offered me an old-fashioned fountain pen. "We're not fully computerized yet, I'm afraid. Renovations proceed slowly in a building this old." As I signed the book, I felt the distinct sensation of being watched. Glancing up, I caught sight of a figure at the far end of the lobby, a woman in what appeared to be a dark dress, standing perfectly still beside the grand staircase. When I blinked, she was gone. "Is there someone else staying here?" I asked casually, trying to keep my voice level. The clerk, whose name tag read Albert, followed my gaze and frowned slightly. "Just a handful of guests. The East Wing is closed for renovations. You'll hardly notice anyone else." He handed me a heavy brass key attached to a wooden tag with the number 37 carved into it. "3rd floor. The elevator is temperamental. I recommend the stairs." The grand staircase spiraled upward, its once plush red carpet now faded to a dull burgundy. As I climbed, the weight of my laptop bag seemed to increase with each step. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women in Victorian attire, their eyes following me as I ascended. The 3rd floor hallway stretched in both directions, lined with identical doors except for their numbers. The wallpaper, once elegant, now peeling in places, featured a repeating pattern of twisted vines and what might have been birds or perhaps bats, too stylized to be certain. Every few feet, wall sconces provided minimal illumination, casting more shadows than light. Room 37 was near the end of the hallway. The key turned with difficulty, requiring a firm push of my shoulder against the door to open it. The Preston Suite was surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings and large windows overlooking what would have been a garden but was now an overgrown tangle of vegetation. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, its dark wood matching the heavy wardrobe and writing desk. Despite the mustiness, someone had made an effort, fresh towels in the adjoining bathroom, clean sheets on the bed, and a small vase with a single white rose on the nightstand. I set down my bags and approached the window. The rain had intensified, streaming down the glass in rivulets that distorted the view of the grounds below. For just a moment, I thought I saw that same female figure walking among the garden's overgrown paths, heedless of the downpour, but when I pressed closer to the glass, there was nothing but rain and darkness. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. The conference coordinator checking if I'd arrived safely at my charming historical accommodation. I replied affirmatively, though charming wasn't exactly the word I would have chosen. When I tried to send the message, the signal dropped to nothing. No service. Great. Just great. I unpacked my essentials and decided to explore the hotel before turning in for the night. My presentation wasn't until the afternoon tomorrow, so I had time to settle in and perhaps find a spot with better reception. The hallway seemed different somehow when I re-entered it, narrower, the ceiling lower. I dismissed the thought as fatigue from travel and made my way back to the staircase. Instead of returning to the lobby, I continued upward, curious about the fourth floor. The staircase ended at a door marked staff only, but it was unlocked. Beyond it, another hallway stretched, this one noticeably colder than the floors below. The carpet here was completely worn through in places, exposing aged wooden floorboards that creaked under my weight. As I ventured further, I became aware of a sound, faint at first, then more distinct. Music. The delicate notes of a piano playing what sounded like a waltz, the melody somehow familiar yet just beyond recognition. I followed the sound to a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. The ballroom, according to the tarnished plaque beside them. Pushing one door open slightly, I peered inside. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a vast space with a vaulted ceiling. At the far end stood a grand piano, its lid raised. But there was no one seated at it. No one visible in the room at all. Yet the music continued, each note clear in the still air. I stepped back, allowing the door to close silently, my heart hammering in my chest. There had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps speakers were installed for the renovation, playing music to test the acoustics. Perhaps. It's beautiful, isn't it? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning quickly, I found myself face to face with a young woman. She had appeared so suddenly and silently that I hadn't heard her approach. Her pale face was framed by dark hair pulled back into a simple style, her dress old-fashioned but elegant. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just exploring." "Everyone explores here," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The Blackwood has many secrets. Some guests never leave." Something about the way she said it sent another chill through me. "Are you staying here too?" In a manner of speaking. She glanced toward the ballroom doors. "The music calls to us. It always has." Before I could ask what she meant, she stepped past me and pushed open the doors. The ballroom beyond was exactly as I had seen it a moment ago, expansive, moonlit, empty. But the music had stopped. "There's no one," I began, turning back to the woman, but the hallway behind me was empty. She had vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I told myself it was just the cold, that the woman had simply walked away while I was distracted. But deep down, something felt wrong, profoundly, fundamentally wrong. I made my way back to my room quickly, no longer interested in exploring. The hotel's charm had worn off, replaced by an uneasy feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach. Back in the Preston suite, I tried my phone again. still no signal. The room's phone was an antique rotary model that, when I lifted the receiver, emitted nothing but a soft, rhythmic clicking sound like distant footsteps. I settled at the writing desk to review my presentation notes, but found it difficult to concentrate. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against the window panes drew my attention. Twice I thought I heard a knock at my door, but when I checked, the hallway was empty. As midnight approached, exhaustion finally overcame my unease. I prepared for bed, slipping under covers that felt unusually cold despite the room's adequate heating. As I reached to turn off the bedside lamp, my gaze fell upon the white rose in its vase. It had withered completely, its petals brown and curled, as if it had been dead for days. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams. In one, I stood in the ballroom as couples waltzed around me in period costume, their faces obscured by ornate masks. In another, I wandered endless hallways that shifted and changed with each turn. And throughout each dream, I felt watched by the portraits on the walls, by figures glimpsed from the corner of my eye, by the hotel itself. I woke suddenly at 3:17 according to the antique clock on the mantel. The room was freezing cold, my breath visible in the dim light filtering through the curtains. The silence was absolute, no rain, no wind, no creaking of the old building. Then I heard it. The sound of someone slowly turning the handle of my door. I lay perfectly still, watching as the brass knob rotated inch by inch. There was a soft click as the latch released, and the door began to open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The door stopped moving. From the darkness of the hallway came a voice, the same one I had heard earlier that evening, but different somehow, as if spoken underwater. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Harrison. Some guests never leave. And we've saved a special place for you." The door slammed shut with such force that the windows rattled. I leapt from the bed and raced to secure the lock, my heart pounding. As I turned the key, I could have sworn I heard laughter, distant, multiple voices echoing down the hallway. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching as dawn slowly brightened the sky. With the first rays of sunlight, my fear began to seem foolish. Old hotels made noises. Drafts could move doors. Imagination filled in the gaps. And yet, as I prepared to head down for breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the Blackwood Grand had recognized me, had been waiting for me. And whatever it wasn't finished yet. Did you know that some places collect sorrows the way others collect dust? Morning brought no respite from the strangeness of the Blackwood Grand. The dining room, once grand, now faded like everything else in the hotel, was empty save for one elderly couple who smiled politely but didn't speak as I took a seat at a table far from theirs. A server appeared almost immediately, his movements stiff and formal, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "Coffee, sir?" he asked, already pouring from a silver pot that looked antique but polished to perfection. "Thank you," I replied, noticing how the liquid steamed in the chilly air of the dining room. Despite large windows allowing in the morning sunlight, the room remained unnaturally cold. "Is there a menu?" "Continental breakfast is served until 10, he said, gesturing to a sideboard I hadn't noticed before. "Hot items can be prepared upon request." As I helped myself to pastries and fruit from the sideboard, I noticed something odd. The elderly couple's table was now empty, but I hadn't seen them leave. Their coffee cups remained, half full, napkins crumpled beside them. Back at my table, I tried to focus on my presentation notes, but found my attention repeatedly drawn to a large portrait hanging on the far wall. A stern-faced man in Victorian dress, his hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a seated woman whose face seemed oddly familiar. The original proprietors, the server said, noticing my interest as he refilled my coffee. Edward and Eleanor Preston. Preston. The same name as my suite. The hotel's been in your family long? I asked conversationally. He paused, the coffee pot hovering over my cup. I'm not family, sir. Just staff. The Prestons have been gone a very long time, though some say they never really left. Before I could ask what he meant, a crash from the kitchen drew his attention. He hurried away, leaving me alone in the vast dining room. I finished my coffee quickly, suddenly eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. In the daylight, I decided to explore the hotel grounds, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The gardens behind the hotel were as overgrown as they had appeared from my window, but there was a certain wild beauty to them. Stone paths wound through tangled vegetation, leading to various features now claimed by nature: a dried fountain, a collapsed gazebo, a small pond choked with lily pads. As I wandered deeper into the garden, the sounds of the nearby town faded, replaced by an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves despite the persistent breeze. It was as if the garden existed in its own pocket of stillness. At the far end of the property, partially hidden by overgrown shrubbery, I discovered a small cemetery. Family plots weren't uncommon on old estates, but finding one at a hotel was unusual. Most of the gravestones were weathered beyond legibility, but a larger central monument remained relatively clear: Preston, with several names listed below. Edward Preston, 1845 to 1899. Eleanor Preston, 1850 to 1899. Frederick Preston, 1875 to 1899. Margaret Preston, 1878 to 1899. An entire family, all died in the same year. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Tragic, isn't it? I turned to find Albert, the front desk clerk, standing a few paces behind me. How had he approached so silently across the gravel path? What happened to them? I asked. The fire of '99, he replied, his gaze fixed on the monument. Started in the east wing. They say Edward had been drinking heavily that night, knocked over an oil lamp. The family perished, along with 17 guests. The hotel was rebuilt, of course, but it was never quite the same. I recalled the closed east wing, supposedly under renovation. Were their bodies recovered? Albert's expression shifted subtly. Some were. Others were never found. Local legend says that's why they linger, those whose remains were never properly laid to rest. You believe the hotel is haunted? I believe, Mr. Harrison, that history leaves impressions. Whether you call them ghosts or memories or something else entirely, they're here all the same. He checked his pocket watch. If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. I wouldn't wander too far into the gardens. Some paths lead nowhere good. As he walked away, I noticed something I hadn't before. His footsteps made no sound on the gravel. I spent the next hour in my room, trying to prepare for my presentation while battling increasing unease. My laptop battery had drained overnight despite being plugged in, and the charging cable now seemed to have no effect. I called down to the front desk to ask about reliable power outlets, but the line produced only that same rhythmic clicking sound I'd heard the night before. In frustration, I decided to head into town early. The conference center was only a 20-minute walk according to the faded map in my room, and I could charge my devices there. As I passed through the lobby, I noticed Albert was not at his post. In fact, The entire hotel seemed deserted, no staff, no other guests, not even ambient noise from cleaning or maintenance. The massive grandfather clock behind the reception desk had stopped at 3:17. Outside, the day had turned overcast, threatening more rain. I walked briskly along the winding road that led to town, passing no other pedestrians or vehicles. The silence was profound, broken only by my footsteps and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. After 15 minutes of walking, I realized something was wrong. According to the map, I should have reached the town's outskirts by now, but the road ahead still wound through dense woods with no buildings in sight. I checked my phone, still no signal, and the battery now critically low despite having been charged before leaving my room. I considered turning back, but something drove me forward. Another bend in the road, I told myself. The town will be just around the next curve. Instead, I found myself facing the iron gates of the Blackwood Grand Hotel. Impossible. I had walked in a straight line away from the hotel. I hadn't turned around. Yet here I was, back where I'd started, as if the road had formed a perfect circle without my noticing. Rain began to fall as I stood there, trying to process what had happened. Within seconds, it became a downpour, forcing me to rush back to the hotel entrance. By the time I reached the doors, I was soaked through. The lobby was no longer empty. A group of people stood near the reception desk, dressed in clothing that seemed oddly formal and somewhat outdated, the women in long dresses, the men in suits with high collars. They turned as I entered, expressions ranging from curiosity to something that looked unsettlingly like hunger. "You're just in time, Mr. Harrison," said one man, stepping forward to offer his hand. "The gathering is about to begin." I didn't take his hand. "Who are you? What gathering?" He smiled, but like everyone else in this hotel, it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Frederick Preston, and tonight is the anniversary." Frederick Preston, the same name I had just seen on the gravestone. A man who had died in 1899. I backed toward the doors, but they had somehow closed behind me. When I turned to open them, the handles refused to budge. "Don't be alarmed," said a woman's voice, familiar, the same one I had heard on the 4th floor. I turned to see the dark-haired woman from the night before, now clearly visible among the group. "We've been waiting for you. The circle can't be completed without a final guest." The group began to move toward the grand staircase, clearly expecting me to follow. Frederick offered his arm to the dark-haired woman, Margaret, I presumed, his sister according to the gravestone, and they led the procession. Against all reason, I followed them. Something about their movements was mesmerizing, like watching an elaborate dance where every step had been practiced for years. They ascended the stairs in perfect synchronicity, their forms sometimes seeming solid, sometimes translucent when they passed through shafts of lightning-illuminated rain from the skylight above. We reached the 4th floor, and the group proceeded to the ballroom. The double doors opened without anyone touching them, revealing a scene that made my breath catch. The ballroom was transformed. No longer empty and abandoned, it now blazed with the light of hundreds of candles. Tables lined the walls, laden with food and drink. A small orchestra played in the corner, the same waltz I had heard the night before. And dozens of people filled the space, dancing, laughing, drinking, all dressed in Victorian finery. "The last night," Frederick said beside me, his voice suddenly hollow. "The last celebration before the fire." As if his words had summoned it, I became aware of a smell, faint at first, then stronger. Smoke. "It always happens this way," Margaret said, her eyes reflecting the candlelight in a way that seemed too bright, too hungry. "We celebrate. The fire begins. We burn. Again and again and again. But this time is different, Frederick added, watching the dancers. This time we have you. Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. What do you want from me? A vessel, Margaret replied simply. Someone to carry us beyond these walls. We've been trapped for so long, Mr. Harrison. But you have a connection to this place, whether you realize it or not. Your bloodline. Your essence. It calls to us. The smoke was thickening now, curling around the edges of the room. Some of the dancers had noticed, their movements becoming frantic, their faces showing the first signs of panic. Others continued as if nothing was wrong, smiling empty smiles as smoke swirled around them. I don't understand, I said, backing away. I've never been here before. I have no connection to this place. Haven't you? Frederick's face was changing, his skin blackening at the edges, his eyes sinking into dark hollows. Check your mother's maiden name, Thomas. Check the guest registry from 1899. Your great-great-grandfather was here that night. He escaped. We didn't. My mother's maiden name was Preston. A distant branch of the family, she had always said, no direct relation to anyone notable. Could it be true? The music had changed, becoming discordant, frenzied. The dancers spun faster and faster, their forms blurring, some beginning to wail as flames appeared at the far end of the ballroom. You can't keep reliving this, I said, the heat growing intense. You need to move on. We can't, Margaret replied, her beautiful face now marred by spreading burn marks. Not without resolution. Not without justice. The fire was spreading rapidly now, consuming the curtains, racing across the floor. The dancers were screaming, their elegant clothes igniting, their skin blistering and blackening. And yet, through it all, Frederick and Margaret remained calm, watching me with those hungry, empty eyes. What justice? I shouted over the roar of the flames. What do you want? Acknowledgement, Frederick said, his voice somehow clear despite the chaos. The truth. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. The ballroom door slammed shut behind me, cutting off any escape. The fire surrounded us now, yet I felt no pain, no burning, only an intense, oppressive heat. Edward didn't start the fire, Margaret said, stepping closer to me, her burned hand reaching for mine. It was your ancestor, Thomas Preston. His jealousy, his greed. He wanted the hotel for himself. He locked the doors. He watched us burn. My head spun with the implications. Could it be true? Was there some dark secret in my family history, some atrocity committed by a distant relative? The room was now completely engulfed in flames, yet we stood in a small circle of untouched floor, Frederick, Margaret, and myself. The other guests had vanished, their screams fading into the roar of the fire. Admit it, Frederick demanded, his face now barely recognizable, charred and twisted. Acknowledge the sin of your blood. Only then can we be free. How can I admit to something I know nothing about? I pleaded. I can't take responsibility for actions I never committed by someone I never knew. Then you will join us, Margaret said, her voice no longer human, a rasping whisper that scraped against my mind. Another soul trapped in the moment of death, another prisoner of the Blackwood Grand. The floor beneath me gave way suddenly, and I was falling through flames and darkness, screams echoing all around me. I braced for impact, for pain, for the end, and woke with a violent start in my hotel room, drenched in sweat. The clock on the mantel read 3:17. I leapt from the bed, heart pounding, unsure what was real and what had been a nightmare. The room was ice cold, my breath visible in the dim light. The white rose on the nightstand was not only withered now but blackened, as if burned. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone. Still no signal, but the browser managed to connect to the hotel's weak Wi-Fi. I searched frantically for information about the Blackwood Grand Hotel fire of 1899. The results loaded painfully slowly, but eventually confirmed the basic facts: a devastating fire, the Preston family killed along with many guests. But there, in an archived newspaper article, was the detail that made my blood run cold. Among the survivors was Mr. Thomas Preston of Boston, no relation to the proprietors, who heroically broke through a window to escape the inferno. Mr. Preston later purchased the remains of the property and financed the rebuilding of the hotel, which reopened in 1901. And below that, a grainy photograph of Thomas Preston, a man whose features, even through the poor quality of the century-old image, bore an unmistakable resemblance to my own. A soft knock at my door made me jump. When I didn't answer, it came again, more insistent. "Mr. Harrison," called Albert's voice. "The gathering is beginning. Your presence is required." I remained silent, backing away from the door. "You can't escape what's in your blood," the voice continued, no longer just Albert's but a chorus of whispers. "The debt must be paid. By blood. By fire. By acknowledgement of sins." The door handle began to turn, though I knew I had locked it. I grabbed my jacket and laptop bag, looking desperately for another way out. The window was my only option, 3 floors up, but with decorative stonework that might provide handholds. As the door began to open, revealing not the hallway beyond but a wall of roaring flames, I made my choice. I smashed the window with the room's desk chair and climbed out onto the narrow ledge, the cool night air of blessed relief after the suffocating heat inside. Looking down at the overgrown garden below, I could see them, dozens of figures in period dress, their faces upturned toward me, watching. Waiting. Some intact, some horribly burned, all with that same hungry look in their eyes. I began to climb down, fingers gripping the ornate stonework, determined to escape. But with each movement, the stone seemed to shift under my hands, becoming softer, warmer, more like flesh than rock. The Blackwood Grand Hotel was alive, and it had no intention of letting me leave. What would you sacrifice to escape your past? What would you confess to save your soul? My descent down the hotel's exterior was a nightmare of shifting textures and impossible physics. The stonework writhed beneath my hands like something alive, sometimes solid enough to support my weight, other times turning soft and yielding, threatening to pull me into the very walls of the building. The ground below seemed to recede the closer I got to it, as if the hotel itself were stretching, expanding, determined to keep me suspended in my desperate escape attempt. After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, my feet touched the ground. The garden around me was no longer merely overgrown, it had transformed into something primeval and wrong. The plants moved with deliberate purpose, vines slithering across the ground like serpents, flowers turning to track my movements, their blooms resembling open mouths rather than petals. The assembled ghosts had vanished, but I could feel their presence all around me, watching from behind trees, from within the very vegetation itself. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and that same cloying, too sweet floral scent I had noticed upon my arrival. I ran toward what I hoped was the direction of the main road, pushing through grasping branches and clinging vines. My phone was useless, its screen displaying only the time, 3:17, always 3:17, but I used its flashlight to illuminate my path through the increasingly dense foliage. The cemetery appeared before me suddenly, as if it had moved into my path rather than me approaching it. The Preston family monument glowed with a faint blue luminescence in the darkness. And there, standing before it, was Margaret. She no longer appeared as the pristine, elegant woman from the ballroom. This version of her was horrifically burned, her once beautiful face a ruin of charred flesh and exposed bone, her Victorian dress blackened and still smoldering in places. Only her eyes remained intact, dark, reflecting the strange light from the monument, filled with that same hungry desperation. "You can't escape your blood," she said, her voice somehow clear despite her ruined mouth. "The debt remains unpaid." "I had nothing to do with what happened to you," I said, backing away. "I'm sorry for what my ancestor did, but I can't change the past." "Can't you?" She tilted her head, an unnaturally jerky motion. "Time works differently here. The past, present, future, all happening at once. Always burning. Always dying. Always waiting for justice." From the shadows around the cemetery, other figures emerged, burned, mutilated ghosts in the tattered remains of their fine clothes. The Preston family. The hotel guests who had died that night. All watching me with eyes that reflected that eerie blue light. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my back pressing against a tree trunk that felt suspiciously warm and yielding, like flesh. "Confession," said Edward Preston, stepping forward. Unlike his children, his ghost appeared intact, unmarked by fire. Acknowledgement of the crime. Acceptance of the blood debt. "I can't confess to something I didn't do." "But you can confess on behalf of your blood," Frederick said, joining his sister and father. "You can acknowledge the truth that has been buried for over a century." A wind rose suddenly, carrying embers and ash, swirling around us in a tightening spiral. The ghosts began to circle me, their movements synchronized, creating a living wall that cut off any escape. "Thomas Preston didn't just escape the fire," Edward continued, his voice rising with the wind. "He started it. He locked the doors. He watched as we burned. All for greed. All for possession of the Blackwood Grand." Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't my own. A man who looked disturbingly like me, pouring kerosene along the hallways of the East Wing. The same man securing chains around the ballroom doors. His face, illuminated by flames, watching from the garden as the hotel burned, screams echoing into the night. "No," I whispered, but even as I denied it, I felt the truth of it in my bones. Some ancestral memory, carried in my blood, recognizing the evil that had been done. "Yes," the ghosts said in unison, their circle tightening. "Your blood knows. Your soul remembers." The wind became a howling cyclone around us, lifting me off my feet. The ghosts pressed closer, their burned hands reaching for me. I could feel their touch, cold yet burning, dead yet somehow alive with hunger and rage. "Confess," Margaret whispered, her ruined face inches from mine. "Set us free." In that moment, suspended in the heart of their ghostly circle, I made my choice. Not just for my survival, but because something deep within me recognized a debt that transcended generations. "I confess," I said, my voice somehow cutting through the howling wind. "Thomas Preston, my ancestor, murdered the Preston family and their guests. He started the fire deliberately, secured the exits, and watched as innocent people died. He purchased the hotel afterward, built on the ashes of his victims. The wealth that eventually came to my family was founded on this crime." The wind stopped abruptly. The ghosts stilled, their expressions changing from rage to something more complex, relief mixed with lingering sorrow. It's not enough, Edward said after a moment. Words without action are meaningless. The debt remains unpaid. What more can I do? I asked, still suspended in their midst. Tell me how to make this right. Return what was stolen, Margaret said. The hotel belongs to us, not to your bloodline. Renounce your ancestors' claim. It seemed absurd. I owned no part of the Blackwood Grand and no legal connection to it whatsoever. But I understood that here, in this place where time folded in on itself and the dead walked, legal realities meant nothing compared to spiritual debts. I renounce any claim to the Blackwood Grand Hotel that came through Thomas Preston's actions, I said formally. I acknowledge that it was wrongfully acquired through murder, and I return it to its rightful owners, the Preston family and those who died in the fire of 1899. The air around us changed, becoming heavier, charged with something like electricity. The blue glow from the monument intensified, spreading to encompass the entire cemetery. It is accepted, Edward said. But balance requires sacrifice. Blood paid with blood. Before I could react, Margaret's ghostly hand plunged into my chest. There was no physical wound, but I felt it, ice-cold fingers wrapping around my heart, squeezing until my vision darkened at the edges. The pain was beyond anything I had ever experienced, a cold fire spreading through my veins. Not your life, Frederick said, noting my terror. Just a piece of your soul. A memory to carry with us beyond the veil. Something precious. Images flashed through my mind as Margaret's hand searched within me, my childhood home, my first love, my graduation day, my mother's smile. The ghosts were examining my memories, looking for something specific, something of equal value to what had been taken from them. They settled on a collection of memories, every moment I had spent with my maternal grandmother, the last Preston to carry the name before marriage changed it. She had been the storyteller of the family, the keeper of our history. In her stories, the Blackwood Grand had never been mentioned, the family tragedy carefully excised from our shared past. These will do, Margaret said, withdrawing her hand from my chest. In it, she held something luminous and shifting, like liquid light. My memories. A fair exchange. The pain subsided, replaced by a hollow emptiness where those memories had been. I could still recall my grandmother existed, knew logically that we had been close, but could no longer access any specific memory of her. It was as if someone had torn pages from the book of my life, leaving only chapter headings to hint at what had been lost. It is finished, Edward declared. The debt is paid. The ghostly circle broke apart, the figures beginning to fade. As they dispersed, I noticed that their appearances were changing, the burn marks healing, their clothing restoring itself, their expressions becoming peaceful. What happens now? I asked, finding myself suddenly standing on solid ground once more as the spectral circle dissolved around me. We move on, Margaret answered, her form now restored to its original beauty, the horrific burns vanishing like mist in sunlight. The cycle is broken. The fire will not repeat. As I watched, the Preston family and the other spirits began to ascend, their bodies becoming transparent, suffused with that same ethereal blue light that had emanated from the monument. They rose like smoke, twisting and intertwining, faces peaceful at last. Edward Preston was the last to depart. Thank you, he said simply. Some debts can only be paid by blood. With that, he too faded into the night sky, leaving me alone in the cemetery that now looked ordinary, just old stones and overgrown weeds, nothing supernatural about it. I made my way back to the hotel, each step feeling strangely light despite my exhaustion and the hollow space in my memory where my grandmother had once lived. The Blackwood Grand loomed against the night sky, but something had changed. It no longer seemed menacing, merely old and tired. In the lobby, I found Albert at his post, looking somehow more solid than before. "Checking out early, Mr. Harrison?" he asked, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Yes," I replied. "I think my business here is finished." He nodded knowingly. "The taxi will arrive shortly. Your conference has been notified of your change in accommodation." As I waited, I noticed the guest book still open on the desk. Curious, I flipped back through its yellowed pages, searching for a specific date. There, in fading ink from 1899, I found it, Thomas Preston's signature, nearly identical to my own. Below his name, added in fresh ink that seemed to dry as I watched, were the words, "Debt paid in full." The taxi arrived as promised, and I left without looking back. As we drove away, I glanced at my phone. Service had returned, and the time read 3:18 a.m. In the days that followed, I would search for information about my grandmother, trying to fill the void left by my sacrificed memories. I found photographs and heard stories from family members, but the personal connection remained severed, a small price to pay for the freedom of souls trapped for over a century. Sometimes I wonder if the Blackwood Grand still stands, or if it finally collapsed when its ghostly inhabitants departed. I've never returned to check. But occasionally, in dreams, I catch glimpses of a grand ballroom filled with dancers, and a dark-haired woman who smiles at me with gratitude rather than hunger. And I know that some debts, once paid, bring peace to both the living and the dead. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.